Look, I want to tell you about a case in my courtroom this past November that I will never forget because it broke my heart in the first 10 minutes and then rewrote everything I thought I knew about it in the next 10. It was a cold morning. I remember because the heater in my chambers was making that usual clicking noise when the building's old bones are warming up. And I had on my docket what looked, at first glance, like a simple small claims case about a fired employee. The man's name was Marcus Reed, and he had been a city bus driver for 14 years. The reason on the termination slip made me put my reading glasses back on to be sure I had read it right. Marcus had been fired for stopping his bus to help a 70-year-old stranger who had collapsed at a bus stop. He didn't even call 911 first. He lifted the man, drove him 2 blocks to a fire station, and waited with him. And for that pure act of humanity, he lost his job. If you have ever been punished for doing the right thing, hit that subscribe button right now and stay with me, because what happened next in my courtroom changed how I think about justice. Let me set the scene so you can see exactly what I saw that morning. My courtroom on the 3rd floor of the Garrahy Judicial Complex was quiet that Tuesday, the long benches mostly empty, the American flag standing tall behind the bench, and the wood warm from the heating vents. The clerk had handed me the case file at 8:47 a.m., and on the front was a yellow post-it note from my law clerk, Claire, that simply read, "Read page 3, Your Honor." I had worked with Claire for 9 years, and her notes usually meant she had spotted something I would miss on a first read. I flipped open the file, and on the plaintiff line was Marcus Reed, age 42, 14 years on the job, no prior discipline, no write-ups. On the defendant line was Brian T. Rivera, age 38, listed as chairman of the Tri-County Transit Authority Board. Claire had underlined his title. In her neat handwriting at the bottom of the page, she had written 3 small letters, CC, our office shorthand, meaning she had already pulled criminal cross-checks and that she had found something that did not add up. Let me tell you about the people, because in my courtroom, the people are always what matters. Marcus came in first. He walked in wearing his one good suit. I could tell because the cuffs were slightly frayed and he had polished his shoes until they squeaked on the marble floor. He had a brown folder under his arm holding his termination papers, and he sat down in the front row, hands folded, looking like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. His shoulders were not hunched, but his eyes were tired. I told him, "Mr. Reed, the court is ready when you are." And he gave me a small nod that said, "Thank you," more than any words could have. Across the aisle I watched the defendant walk in, and that is when my father's old instinct kicked in, the one he taught me as a boy in Providence, that you can read a lot about a person before they ever open their mouth. When I looked at Brian Rivera, I could immediately tell this was not a man who had come to make things right. He was tall, well-built, dressed in what I later learned was a $600 Navy suit with a Tom Ford tie. On his wrist I spotted a Rolex. Yes, an actual Rolex, with the blue face that catches courtroom light. And resting on the table in front of him sat a tan leather briefcase with brass corners that I had seen in the windows of the boutique shop on Hope Street. Hanging from the briefcase handle was a set of keys with the unmistakable logo of a Range Rover. His cologne drifted all the way to the bench, something expensive, sandalwood and cedar, and when he sat down he did not look at Marcus once. He pulled out his phone, glanced at it, and only put it away when the clerk cleared her throat. His nails were clean and manicured, his hair freshly cut, his shoes looking like they cost more than what Marcus earned in 2 weeks. He had the look of a man who had been told he was important for so long that he had started to believe it. I asked both parties to state their presence for the record, and Marcus said clearly, "Marcus Reed, plaintiff, Your Honor, 14 years as a Tri-County bus driver until October 31st of this year." Brian, by contrast, said his name like he was ordering coffee. Brian Rivera, defendant, chairman of the board. And he added that last part in a tone that made it sound as if it should mean something to me. It did not. I told him simply, "In my courtroom, Mr. Rivera, we are all equal, no title above the oath, and I will thank you to keep yours in check." He nodded, but his eyes stayed cold, and that small coldness told me a story his mouth had not yet started to tell. Then I called the first witness, and that is when the heart of the case walked through my door. He came in slowly, leaning on a cane, and he had a face that told me he had seen hard years. He was 69 years old, 5'7" if he was standing straight, wearing a faded blue work jacket with a Veterans of Foreign Wars patch on the left chest, and a bus pass clipped on the right pocket. He had thin gray hair combed carefully across his head, and a small American flag pin in his lapel, so old the red had faded to pink. He gave his name slowly. Harold Wendell Bennett, Your Honor. I asked him to speak up a bit more, and he did. When he told me he had served in Vietnam from 1968 to 1971, at the age of 19, I felt my chest tighten the way it always does when I hear those years spoken out loud. Harold was a Vietnam veteran, working the night shift as a bouncer at a downtown club just to make ends meet, raising a daughter named Marie on his own. And Marie, Harold told me softly, has severe asthma that requires a medication so expensive he laughs every time he fills the prescription. I let that sit in the courtroom for a moment. I did not speak. Silence in my courtroom is sometimes the most powerful tool I have, and I wanted the room to feel what I was feeling. Then I asked Marcus to please tell me what happened that day. He stood slowly and said, Your Honor, on October 11th, 2024, at around 10:47 in the morning, I was on Route 14 heading north on Broad Street. I had 9 passengers on the bus, including 2 students going to LaSalle Academy and an elderly woman with a cane. As I approached the stop at Doyle Avenue, I saw a man, this man right here, Mr. Bennett, slumped over on the bench at the stop, his face gray, his hand still on his cane. I stopped him and asked, Did you recognize him as a passenger? Marcus said, No, Your Honor, I never saw him before in my life. And that is when I knew what Marcus was, a man who helped strangers because his conscience told him to. He told me he pulled the bus over, pressed the emergency flashers, ran to Mr. Bennett and supported him the 2 blocks until a fireman at Station 12 took over. The whole thing, he said, took him about 14 minutes off his route. He got back on the bus, finished his shift, drove the students to school, drove the woman with the cane home, and turned in his bus at 5:30 that afternoon, like he had done for 14 years. Now, before I tell you what happened next, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now if you believe a man like Marcus should still be wearing that uniform. I want to see how many of you out there believe a good deed should not cost a man his job, because the answer I am about to give you might surprise you. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is one of those stories you will not want to forget, so tap that button and ride with me through it. The next day, Marcus came in for his shift and was told to report to the dispatch office, where a young HR woman he had never seen before handed him an envelope. Inside the envelope was a 1-page termination letter signed by the chairman of the board, Brian T. Rivera. The letter said, in the cold language these things are always written in, that Marcus had abandoned his scheduled route without authorization, and that this constituted gross misconduct under Section 14.3 of the Employee Handbook. There was no mention of Mr. Bennett. There was no mention of the medical emergency. There was no mention that Marcus had helped save a life. I asked Marcus, Did you appeal? And he said, Yes, Your Honor, 3 times. Each appeal was denied within 24 hours, all signed the same way, B. Rivera, Chairman. I looked across the aisle at Brian and I asked him plainly, Mr. Rivera, would you please explain to this court in your own words why your board voted to terminate a 14-year employee for stopping his bus to help a man collapse at one of your own stops? Brian crossed his legs, looked at me with the look that says, Do you really want to do this? And said, Your Honor, our board has 0 tolerance for drivers who leave their routes without prior written authorization. Policy is policy, and Mr. Reed was made aware of that policy during his onboarding training. I felt my hand tighten on the gavel, but my voice stayed calm because my father taught me a judge's voice should never be the loudest thing in the room. I asked him, Did anyone on your board call 911 to verify there was a medical emergency? He said no. I asked him, Did anyone contact Mr. Bennett? He said no. I asked him, Did anyone contact the fire station to confirm the rescue? He said no. Then I asked the one question that mattered slowly. Mr. Rivera, in the entire month of October, did your board terminate any other driver for leaving a route? And that is when Brian smiled. I will never forget that smile. And he said, Yes, Your Honor. 2 others, one for stopping to retrieve a child who had fallen from a bike, and one for waiting 3 minutes for an elderly woman who had dropped her groceries in the crosswalk. I could feel the courtroom shift. I could see Marcus's hand grip the bench. I could see Harold's eyes fill. I made a small note to myself. These terminations were not about policy. They were about something else. I let Brian go on and he went on too long. He told me about operational efficiency, about scheduling integrity, about the public's trust in the transit system. He name-dropped like a man who keeps every business card he has ever been handed, telling me he had spoken to the governor's chief of staff about modernizing the system, and that the mayor had personally thanked him for raising standards. The whole thing had the smell of a man trying to make a small firing sound like a big achievement. I waited him out, looked down at his hands, and watched his Rolex catch the light every time he gestured. There was no humility in this man. There was no humanity in this man. And that is when I decided I needed to see what his life really looked like online. Hold on with me here for 1 second. Before I tell you what came next, leave me one single word in the comments, just one, describing what you think a man who fires a hero deserves. Because the next witness I called was about to walk in here with something none of us in this courtroom expected, and I cannot wait for you to see it. I then called Officer Jenna Mendez of the Providence Police Department to the stand, badge number 4721, who had been on patrol the day of the incident and had taken the initial incident report. Officer Mendez looked young but steady, and she swore in clearly. I asked her what she knew about October 11th, and she pulled out her report and said, "Your Honor, on October 11th, 2024, at approximately 10:52 a.m., units were dispatched to a medical assist at Doyle Avenue bus stop. Upon arrival, EMS had already taken possession of the patient, Mr. Harold Bennett, age 69, and the bus driver, Marcus Reed, was still on scene providing witness statements. Lieutenant Cordova noted in his addendum that the bus driver's actions were commendable and consistent with community first responder protocol. I asked her plainly, "Officer, in your professional opinion, did Mr. Reed break any law?" She said, "No, Your Honor, he did not." And I let that sit in the room for a long moment. And then I did something that surprised even my clerk. I asked her to please pull up the Tri-County Transit Authority's social media accounts on her phone, and I asked the defendant politely to step forward. He did, with that same confident stride, and I told him, "Mr. Rivera, in a moment, I am going to ask you about a series of posts." He nodded, the nod a CEO gives when he thinks he knows the punchline. I told him, "I'm going to ask you to read them aloud, and I am going to ask you to tell this court whether they are true or not." He said, "Fine, Your Honor." And that is when Claire walked over with the phone, set it face up on the bench, and the whole courtroom leaned in. The first post was from October 19th, 8 days after Marcus was fired. It was a photo of Brian Rivera, dressed not in his Navy suit, but in a black tuxedo, sitting at what looked like the bar at the Capitol Grill in Boston. The caption read, and I want you to hear it exactly as I read it, "Celebrating a great quarter for the authority. Don't let anyone tell you public service can't come with great taste." I counted 47 likes on that post, and among the comments were 5 members of the Tri-County Transit Authority Board using their personal accounts, all thanking him by first name. I looked at Brian and asked him plainly, was this celebration a private gift, or was it paid for by authority funds? He said, "Personal funds, Your Honor." I asked, "Would you mind if the court subpoenaed that dinner's receipt?" He went quiet. I let the quiet sit there for 8 full seconds, and I counted them in my head. Then I moved on. The second post, dated September 3rd, was a photo of a brand new Rolex on a man's wrist. The face matched the one he was wearing that morning. The caption read, "Treating myself. Some of us believe in rewarding hard work, not punishing it." 48,200 followers saw that post. 48,200 people watching. And right below it, in the comments, were 4 different bus drivers from the Tri-County system complaining about being written up for being 2 minutes late, 3 minutes late, 1 minute late. One of them had written a simple sentence that I read in my head twice before I read it out loud. "We get written up for being human. The chairman gets Rolex posts for the cameras." I asked Brian, "Mr. Rivera, is this how the chairman of a public transit authority should be speaking to the people who keep the buses running?" He shrugged. He actually shrugged at me in my courtroom, while an elderly veteran sat 10 feet away with tears in his eyes. The third post was not a photo. It was a video, dated September 27th, 22 seconds long. The video opened on Brian Rivera standing in front of a transit authority bus depot with the company logo behind him. He was wearing the same Rolex. He was speaking into his phone camera like a man running for office, which I will tell you in a moment he actually was. And he was saying, and I want you to hear this, we are tightening up the system, folks. The days of slop are over. If a driver leaves his route for any reason without authorization, he is gone. We are going to run this system the way it should be run, and if that means we lose a few drivers who think they can play hero, then so be it. The video had 11,742 views. The video had 412 comments, and among the comments were 6 employees of the authority saying, "Are you serious? And we have to choose between helping people and keeping our jobs?" And before I tell you what came next in this courtroom, let me say this. If you have been riding with me this far, you are the kind of person that this page is for. Leave me a comment below, just one sentence, telling me one time someone like Marcus did the right thing for you. I want this page filled with the names of the Marcuses in all our neighborhoods. And share this story with one person you love today, because what I am about to tell you is the biggest hidden crime I have seen in 22 years on this bench. Now, and this is where I want you to lean in. At 10:14 a.m. on November 4th, just 4 days after Marcus was fired, Brian T. Rivera filed paperwork with the state of Rhode Island to run for mayor of Providence. He had been building a brand on social media as the man who cleaned up the buses, and Marcus's firing was one of the campaign stories he was telling donors behind closed doors. I knew this because Claire had pulled the candidate filings, and there in the financial disclosure was a list of campaign expenditures I will get to in a moment. I looked at Brian, who had gone very pale, and I asked him, "Mr. Rivera, did you fire Marcus Reed in part to build a narrative for your campaign?" He said, "Absolutely not, Your Honor." I asked him, "Did you discuss the firing with your campaign manager?" He said, "I do not recall." And I let that answer be the second lie of the morning, because by then I had the paper trail. But here is what he didn't know, and what this courtroom didn't know, until the next witness walked through the door. I called Anita Petrowski to the stand, the chief financial officer of the Tri-County Transit Authority, a woman who had worked there for 19 years and who I could tell by her eyes had been wanting to say something for a very long time. She swore in, sat down, and placed a brown accordion file on the bench in front of her. She was shaking slightly. I told her, "Take your time," and she did. Then she opened the file and laid out one by one 6 credit card statements from the authority's corporate account, 6 pages each, dated between July and September. And what she said next, I am going to remember for the rest of my life. She said, "Your Honor, between July 1st and September 30th of 2024, Chairman Rivera charged a personal dinner at the Capitol Grill on August 4th for $1,847. He charged a personal flight to Miami on August 14th for $4,212. He charged a personal stay at the Four Seasons on August 14th for $2,890. He charged a Breitling watch, not the one he wore today, but a previous one, for $6,400 on August 22nd. He charged a personal shopping trip to Saks Fifth Avenue on September 8th for $3,712. And he charged a personal car detailing at a boutique shop on September 21st for $1,250. She paused, looked at Brian, and said softly, "Your Honor, the total personal charges on a public account were $87,419. Then she added the line that did it. "I brought this to the board's audit committee on September 30th. On October 1st, I was told my services were no longer required." The courtroom went completely silent. I could hear the clock on the wall. I could hear Harold's cane tapping softly. I could see Marcus's face drain of color, then fill with something like hope. I could see Brian's face go pale, then red, then pale again. And that is when he did the one thing I will never forgive in any courtroom I sit in. He turned to me, looked me in the eye, and said, "Judge, do you have any idea what you are doing to me right now? Do you know who my father is?" And there it was, the moment I had been watching climb towards since he first walked in. He looked me up and down and he said, "My father is Police Chief Enrique Rivera of the Providence Police Department. And when he hears about this circus, you are going to regret the day you ever opened your mouth." I have been a judge long enough to know that this is the moment that defines a courtroom. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment, then I spoke slowly and said, "Mr. Rivera, you have just insulted this court, your city, and the uniform your father wears. Your father has served this city for 31 years with honor, and you have spit on that honor in the last 5 seconds. I am now going to do something I had hoped I would not have to do. I am going to call your father, Police Chief Enrique Rivera, into this courtroom, and he can answer for the way his son has used his name in a court of law. I made a decision right there to call in the chief himself because this was not about a small claims case anymore. This was about whether the badge of the Providence Police Department means anything when it gets dragged through the mud of one man's ego. The clerk dialed the chief's direct line, and within 22 minutes, Police Chief Enrique Rivera walked into my courtroom in full uniform, pressed blues, brass badge, the whole thing, and he looked like a weight had just landed on his shoulders. He took the seat next to his son, looked at him, and said only 4 words. "What did you do?" Brian said nothing. The chief turned to me and said, "Your Honor, whatever my son has done, I am here for it. Please proceed." I then asked Brian a question in front of his father that I will never forget asking. I said, "Mr. Rivera, when you fired Marcus Reed, did you know he had saved a 69-year-old Vietnam veteran's life?" He said, "I was aware of the circumstances." I said, "And you fired him anyway?" He said, "Yes." I said, "And while you were firing good bus drivers, you were charging personal dinners, flights, hotels, watches, and shopping sprees on the public dime?" He said, "Yes." I said, "And you used the firing of a hero to build a campaign video for your run for mayor?" He said nothing. I said, "And your answer, Mr. Rivera, is what?" He said, "Yes." I then asked the chief quietly, "Chief Rivera, does your son have the personal funds to cover the $87,419 he charged to the authority?" The chief looked down at his hands and said, "No, Your Honor, he does not." Let me tell you what I did next, because this is where I think about mercy and accountability as one thing. I told Brian Rivera that I was going to do something I had not done in 22 years on the bench. I was going to order a sentence that fit the soul of what he had done, not just the paperwork. I told him that effective immediately, he was being removed as chairman of the Tri-County Transit Authority Board. I told him he was being ordered to pay back every single dollar of the $87,419 he had wrongly charged, plus a $25,000 civil penalty to be divided between Marcus Reed's lost wages and a new scholarship fund for veterans' children in Harold's name. And I told him he was going to serve 500 hours of community service. And I want you to hear this carefully. And those 500 hours were to be served not as a suit-wearing board chairman handing out checks, but as a bus driver on actual Tri-County routes, under the supervision of a senior driver learning what his own employees experience every single day. I let that sentence sit in the room for 10 full seconds, and I want to describe to you what happened. Brian's father closed his eyes. Brian's face went from red to white. Marcus, in the front row, put his head in his hands and cried for the first time in 8 months. Harold Wendell Bennett sat up in his chair, and I'm telling you, this 69-year-old Vietnam veteran grew 2 inches taller in that moment, and he looked at me and said, "Judge, that's poetic justice." I said, "Mr. Bennett, that is exactly what it is supposed to be," and I meant every word of it. I then explained to the courtroom why every part of that sentence was harsh, but fair. The removal was because public office is not a stage for personal enrichment. The repayment was because the public's money must return to the public. The scholarship was because Harold's daughter Marie had been paying for an expensive asthma medication her whole life, and the next veteran child should not have to. The community service was because the man who fired a hero needed to learn what it felt like to live a hero's day, mile after mile, stop after stop. And the supervision was because a man who has not earned trust must earn it back one route at a time. I told the courtroom, I have nothing personal against Brian Rivera, but I have everything personal against what he did, and the law does not bend for wristwatches. Sometimes the right sentence isn't the one that hits hardest. Sometimes it's the one that, in its own small way, heals the most. So before I let you go, hit subscribe if you want to keep riding with me, because the next story I'm bringing you is even harder to put down. We are going inside a custody hearing where a father fought for his daughter against a system that never wanted to give her back. Thanks for being here with me today. From my bench to your screen, I will see you on the next story. The case looked ordinary for about 10 seconds, and then I saw a man in the back of my courtroom holding a paper bag like it was something fragile. It was late in the afternoon on November 17, 2023, and the light coming through the high windows had that cold gray look that makes people sit a little straighter and speak a little softer. I had already heard speeding tickets, parking disputes, and a man who argued with a stop sign like it had insulted his family. But when I looked down at the file in front of me and then back up at the people waiting for me, I felt that quiet pressure I've learned to trust, the kind that tells me a small case may not be small at all. If you care about the moments when dignity gets tested and justice has to do more than read from a page, subscribe and tell me in the comments if you would have stayed as calm as this man did, because what started with one denied meal turned into something nobody in that room expected. I remember the exact time because I glanced at the clock above the clerk's station when the matter was called. It was 4:12 p.m., and the courtroom had gone from the usual shuffling noise to that tight silence that comes when people sense a real fight is about to begin. The file said City of Providence versus Vanessa Rivera, age 34, owner of Harbor Line Diner on Atwells Avenue. The charges listed were disorderly conduct, filing a false police report, and a municipal public accommodation violation tied to an incident that happened at 10:47 p.m. on November 11, 2023. I read those words once, then twice, because Veterans Day attached to a denied meal already told me this was not going to be routine. When I looked at the defendant, I could immediately tell she was used to walking into rooms as if they belonged to her. She wore a cream designer coat over a black dress, a gold Cartier watch that caught the light every time she moved her wrist, and a pair of heels sharp enough to sound like small hammers on the courtroom floor. I noticed a large quilted bag set beside her chair, a phone with a mirrored case, a diamond bracelet, and car keys with a Range Rover fob that she kept turning over in her hand like a signal to the world. Her perfume reached me before her voice did, and her posture said the same thing her face did. She expected to be inconvenienced, not judged. The victim sat quietly in the back, and I noticed him before anyone spoke his name. He was 69 years old, his file later told me, and he wore a clean navy jacket over a faded plaid shirt, with a Vietnam veteran cap folded carefully in his lap instead of on his head. His hands were rough, the kind of hands that do not come from office work, and he held that small paper bag against his knee as if he did not want to wrinkle it. When I learned his name was Harold Benton and that he had served from 1968 to 1971, something in the room changed for me. By the time I also learned he worked nights as a bouncer to help pay for his grown daughter's asthma medicine, I knew I needed to listen to every detail, not just the loud ones. I asked the clerk to hand up the police report and the supplemental statement. Officer Daniel Mendez, badge number 4721, had written that he responded to Harbor Line Diner at 10:58 p.m. after a call from the owner, reporting a hostile male refusing to leave after kitchen closure. The supplemental report, filed at 11:16 p.m., noted no visible signs of intoxication, no threats heard by the officer, and no damage to property. It also noted that the reporting party, Ms. Rivera, claimed the man had tried to force free service by invoking military status. That language bothered me at once because it sounded polished, rehearsed, and just a little too convenient. I asked Ms. Rivera if she understood the charges, and she said she did in a tone that told me she believed understanding them was beneath her. Then she looked right at me and said, "Your Honor, this whole thing has been blown up online by people who don't know what happened." I told her that online noise meant nothing to me, and facts meant everything. She gave me a quick smile that had no warmth in it and said, "Good, because I have facts." I have been around people a long time, and I know the difference between confidence and performance. What I saw in her was performance. Then I turned to Harold and asked him to come forward. He rose slowly, not weakly, just carefully, like a man who had learned to protect old pain without complaining about it. When he stood beside the table, he thanked me before I asked him a single question, and that alone told me something about his character. I asked him what was in the paper bag, and he gave me the saddest little half smile and said, "A sandwich from a vending machine at the bus station, Judge. I bought it after all this." The room got very still because sometimes one simple answer says more than a whole speech. He told me he had finished a shift working security at a club on Empire Street around 10:20 that night. He said he had seen the diner's sign all week, "Veterans Eat Free" on November 11th, and he went there planning to use the offer, but he had money in his pocket and was ready to pay if there was any issue. He said his daughter Jenna had been having a bad month with asthma. Her inhalers and nebulizer medicine had cost more than he expected, and he had taken extra shifts to keep up. He did not say any of that to make me pity him. He said it like a man reading a weather report, just telling me what was true. That kind of plain truth gets my attention faster than drama ever will. Ms. Rivera let out a little laugh through her nose while he spoke, and I heard it. I asked her if she found any part of his testimony amusing, and she said, "No, Your Honor, I just don't think he's telling the whole story." I told her she would have her chance, but not at the cost of basic respect. Harold went on and said that when he entered the diner, two young women were filming each other near the pie display, and a hostess was wiping menus. He said Ms. Rivera told him the kitchen was closed, but less than 2 minutes later she seated the women who called her by first name and mentioned doing a live post. That detail made me look back at the report. I asked Harold if he raised his voice, cursed, or refused to leave when told to go. He said, "No, Judge." I asked if I could at least buy coffee and toast. Then I pointed to the sign. He told me Ms. Rivera walked over, looked at his cap, and said the free meal window ended at 9 p.m., even though the sign outside did not say that anywhere. When he offered to pay full price, she told him, "We don't do pity meals after hours." I watched his face when he repeated those words, and I could see he was not just remembering the insult, he was reliving the humiliation. By then I had heard enough to know there was more underneath. So I asked Officer Mendez to testify. He came forward in uniform, stood straight, and spoke with the kind of careful tone I trust more than polished speeches. He told me he arrived to find Harold already outside, hands visible, standing near the curb under the diner's neon sign, and Ms. Rivera at the doorway speaking loudly on her phone. He confirmed that Harold was calm, answered questions directly, and showed him both cash and a debit card when asked whether he had intended to pay. And if you think you already know where this was going, stay with me and comment what you would have done, because the next part was where the polished story started to crack. Officer Mendez told me Ms. Rivera insisted Harold had lunged toward the counter and scared staff, but the officer said he saw no signs of a struggle, no broken items, and no frightened employees coming forward. He also told me something else that made me lean in. He said Ms. Rivera mentioned her connections before he even finished taking names. "The officer told me," I said, wanting it clear for the record, "to repeat exactly what she said." And he answered, "She said, 'My father is Police Chief Rivera, and I hope this report gets written the right way.'" I looked at Ms. Rivera and asked if she denied making that statement. She lifted one shoulder and said, "I might have said my father would not appreciate veterans causing scenes in local businesses." It was a smooth answer, but not a clean one. I asked Officer Mendez if Harold ever said he wanted special treatment because he was a veteran. The officer said no, that Harold only pointed to the sign and then offered to pay twice. That meant the phrase in the report about forcing free service by invoking military status had not come from Harold at all. It had been placed there by someone else's framing. I asked Harold why he did not just walk away sooner. He looked at me and said, "Judge, because that sign was not about food, it was about respect, and she made me feel like I was begging." I let a few seconds pass after he said that. Silence can do what shouting never can. It makes people sit with a truth they were hoping to escape. Then Harold added that he had not even told Ms. Rivera he was in Vietnam until she pointed at his cap and laughed. That sentence hit me harder than she probably understood, because mockery has a way of revealing character faster than anger does. Ms. Rivera asked to speak, and I let her. She said Harold came in aggressive, that her staff felt unsafe, and that her business was under pressure because online followers expect content, timing, and atmosphere. She kept talking about brand image, customer flow, and protecting the dining experience, as if she were explaining a weather emergency instead of a human decision. She also made sure to mention that her restaurant account had over 50,000 followers across platforms, and that a false story could hurt payroll. I listened, but the more she spoke, the less she sounded like a person who had made a mistake, and the more she sounded like a person who had calculated one. Then I asked the question that changed her rhythm. I said, "If your kitchen was closed at 10:47 p.m., why were two women seated after Mr. Benton was turned away?" For the first time she hesitated. She said they were media partners picking up a prearranged dessert feature, not full diners, but Officer Mendez had already told me he saw menus on their table and heard an order for coffee, pie, and chicken soup. Ms. Rivera quickly said the officer must have misunderstood. I have heard many people in court blame confusion when facts start to tighten around them. It almost never helps. I asked if there was security video from the diner. She said the system had been glitchy that night. I asked if she had social media content from the event. She said she did not control what guests posted. Then Harold quietly raised a hand and said, "Judge, my granddaughter showed me something after it happened." I looked at him and asked what he meant. He said a short video had been posted and deleted from the diner's account before midnight, but his granddaughter had saved screenshots and sent him the clip. That is the moment I felt the room tilt. I told the clerk to see whether the material was available and authenticated. Harold handed over an older phone, the kind with a cracked corner and a case that had seen better days, and said his granddaughter had texted him both the clip and a link to the post before it disappeared. While the clerk worked, I asked Ms. Rivera one more time whether she had posted anything about the incident. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Absolutely not." It was not the denial of someone uncertain, it was the denial of someone who believed the evidence was gone. As we waited, I asked Harold why this meal mattered that much to him if he had money to pay. He took a breath and said, "Because I'm tired, Judge." Then he explained that he worked security 3 nights a week, loaded delivery trucks 2 mornings a week when his knee allowed it, and still tried to keep his daughter from choosing between medicine and rent. He said he had seen the sign and thought, for one night, somebody remembered men like him with kindness instead of slogans. That sentence stayed with me. It still does, because there is a difference between hunger in the stomach and hunger for human decency. The clerk signaled that she had the material, and I asked that it be shown. On the screen I saw the outside window of the diner, the patriotic poster taped near the entrance, and Harold standing just inside the door with one hand near his cap. I heard Ms. Rivera's voice before I saw her face. She was laughing softly and saying, "Watch this, guys, this is exactly why we set time limits." Then the camera moved, and one of the young women filming asked, "Is he really asking for a free vet plate this late?" Ms. Rivera answered, "He can ask all night. This isn't a shelter." I felt my hand tighten on the gavel, but I kept my voice steady. I asked the clerk to replay the audio. This time, I listened for every word. Harold never shouted. He never threatened. All I heard from him was, "Ma'am, I can pay," and then, "Your sign says veterans." The answer he got was a laugh, a turned shoulder, and somebody in the background saying, "This is going to blow up online." If you have ever wondered how one ugly moment can expose a much bigger lie, subscribe and keep listening, because what came off that screen next was only the beginning. The second clip was worse because it was calmer. It showed the 2 young women seated with pie and coffee while Harold stood outside near the glass, waiting for the officer. Ms. Rivera stepped into frame holding a little tabletop sign that read, "Tonight we honor our heroes." She smiled into the camera and said, "At Harbor Line we love our veterans, but boundaries matter." Then she winked. There are moments in court when a person's mask does not slip all at once. It peels away, and everyone watches it happen together. I asked Ms. Rivera if she still wished to deny posting about the incident. She crossed her arms and said the clips were taken out of context. I asked what context made "this isn't a shelter" acceptable to say to a 69-year-old veteran who offered to pay. She said, Judge, with respect, people online need clean stories, and my business depends on engagement." That answer was bad enough, but then she made it worse. She looked at me with a kind of bored smile and said, "You may not understand how modern business works." I paused, not because I lacked an answer, but because I wanted my answer to matter. I asked her, "Are you suggesting that humiliating a veteran is a business model?" She rolled her eyes, and that gesture alone told me more than any speech. Then she said something that I will never forget. She leaned forward and said, "With respect, Judge, you're an old man in a robe. Social media is bigger than this courtroom, and you don't understand the real world. A courtroom can forgive many things more easily than contempt dressed up as sophistication." I let the silence stretch after that. I wanted her to hear her own words in the quiet. Then I told her, in the calmest voice I could manage, "In my courtroom, everyone is equal, and nobody buys a second class of human being with followers, perfume, and a last name." She looked away for the first time since the hearing began. Harold did not move. Officer Mendez stared straight ahead. I have learned that when arrogance finally meets a wall, it often looks like disbelief before it looks like fear. Then my clerk handed me a printed screenshot from the same account, and that is when the floor under the case really opened up. The post was not just a clip, it was part of a promotional story sequence tagged Heroes Night. One frame showed a caption reading, "42 veteran meals served tonight. Proud to partner with Rivera Community Heroes Fund." I looked at the date and timestamp. It was posted at 11:09 p.m., just minutes after Harold was pushed out. That meant somebody was claiming dozens of veteran meals had been served on a night when one veteran had been humiliated at the door. I asked Ms. Rivera what the Rivera Community Heroes Fund was. She said it was a reimbursement partnership through a local charitable program that helped restaurants cover free meals for veterans on certain holidays. I asked whether her diner submitted meal counts for payment. She said yes, but only approximate counts. That word, approximate, struck me like a warning bell. Charities do not send money on guesses, and public trust does not run on estimates. When I asked how a kitchen that was closed could have served 42 veteran meals after 10 p.m., she had no answer ready. Harold spoke quietly and said, "Judge, I saw that post too. My granddaughter said if she claimed those meals, then she got paid for people she never fed." I turned back to the file and felt something cold settle in my chest. Now this was no longer just about a denied meal or even a false report. It was about possible fraud built on patriotic language and a veteran's humiliation. I have seen cruelty before, and I have seen greed before. But when people combine them, they usually think the flag will hide the fingerprints. I asked the clerk whether there were any attachments in the city complaint file. She said there was a citizen packet submitted that morning by email, but not yet reviewed in court. I told her to print it immediately. It came from a former waitress named Elena Sosa, who wrote that she quit Harbor Line 2 weeks after the incident because she was told to stage photos of veterans receiving meals whether they ordered or not. She attached screenshots of internal messages from Ms. Rivera saying, "Get older men near the sign," and "We need enough hero content to justify the reimbursement." My stomach turned when I read that. I asked Ms. Rivera whether Elena Sosa had worked for her. She said yes, but called her disgruntled and unstable. I asked whether the messages were fake. She said she had not seen them. Then I read one aloud, including the date, November 11th, 2023, at 6:14 p.m. "Don't comp too much real food. Dessert photos are enough. The fund won't check every plate." At that point, I watched color drain from her face in a way no acting can fake. That was the moment I knew I was not listening to a misunderstanding anymore. I was listening to a pattern. I made a decision right there to call in an authority figure, because this had moved far beyond a diner argument. I asked the bailiff to contact Chief Antonio Rivera and also notify the city's financial crimes unit that potential fraud connected to the Rivera Community Heroes Fund had surfaced in open court. If Ms. Rivera had invoked her father's name to pressure an officer, then her father deserved to hear precisely how that name had been used. And if charity money was involved, then the public deserved more than outrage. It deserved an investigation. If you believe dignity belongs to everyone, not just the rich, the connected, or the camera-ready, stay with me and leave a comment, because this is where the courtroom stopped being a stage for excuses and became a place for truth. While we waited, I asked Harold one question I had been holding back. I asked him whether he knew that fund existed before that night. He said no. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded receipt from a pharmacy. It showed a charge of $287.46 for his daughter's medication filled 2 days before the diner incident. He looked at me and said, "Judge, I wasn't there to take anything. I was trying to save $12. I have handled cases with thousands of dollars on the table that felt smaller than that sentence." Chief Rivera arrived faster than I expected, still in uniform, with the kind of expression a father wears when he already suspects the worst but still hopes for the best. I explained the posture of the case and asked him whether the Rivera Community Heroes Fund used reimbursement based on restaurant reporting. He said yes, but only when supported by receipts and verified meal counts. Then I asked whether his daughter's business participated. He closed his eyes for 1 second and said, "Yes, Your Honor." I cannot forget that moment because his voice carried both authority and heartbreak at the same time. I asked him whether he had any knowledge that his name had been used with responding officers during disputes at the diner. He looked at his daughter, and before he could answer, she broke in and said, "Dad, tell them how these things get twisted." He did not rescue her. He did not soften it. He told me there had already been private concerns about missing documentation in 2 earlier reimbursement cycles, and that he had told her personally to produce clean records. Then he said, "If she used my office to pressure police, I want that on the record too." That is when I saw real panic touch her face. A financial crimes detective, Sergeant Lena Ortiz, arrived shortly after with a slim folder and a tablet. I asked if she could perform only a preliminary review in court, not a final conclusion. She said yes. She pulled up the fund's reimbursement submissions and found Harbor Line's entry for November 11th, 2023. It claimed 42 veteran meals, 8 family discount bundles, and 1 special donation match from the diner. Total requested reimbursement, $1,268.40. The submission included 3 photos, and in one of them, enlarged on her screen, I could clearly see Harold standing near the window outside, blurred in the background while a caption celebrated serving those who served. I felt anger rise in me then, but I have learned that anger must be harnessed or it becomes useless. I asked Sergeant Ortiz whether the receipts matched the count. She said no, not even close. The digital point-of-sale record showed only 11 discounted checks that night, 4 of them desserts, and none linked to verified veteran vouchers. She also noted that a block of meal codes had been reused from a Memorial Day event months earlier. That was the hidden bigger crime laid bare in my courtroom. Not just disrespect, not just a false report, but fraud built on the image of service members and financed through public trust. I turned to Ms. Rivera and asked whether she wished to say anything before I ruled on the charges before me and referred the rest for criminal review. She had lost the polished smile by then. Her hands shook slightly, and the Range Rover key fob that had twirled so proudly earlier now sat still against the table. First she said it was a bookkeeping error. Then she said a manager handled submissions. Then she said Harold had embarrassed her in front of influencers. When stories change that fast, the truth is usually standing somewhere behind them, waiting its turn. Harold never asked me to destroy her. That mattered to me. When I asked whether he wanted to address the court again, he said, "Judge, I just want her to stop using men like me as decoration." There are days when a courtroom hears a line so honest that it seems to clean the air. That was one of those days. I looked at him, then at the owner who had laughed at him, and I thought about my upbringing, about simple meals, hard work, and the way respect costs nothing until selfish people decide to put a price on it. I found Ms. Rivera responsible on the municipal public accommodation violation and the disorderly conduct count without hesitation. On the false report charge, I found clear evidence that she knowingly exaggerated and distorted Harold's conduct to provoke police action against him. I dismissed any implication that Harold had sought improper free service because the record showed the opposite. He offered to pay, remained calm, and was targeted for content and convenience. Then I explained, slowly and clearly, that my penalty would be harsh because the conduct was harsh, but fair because it would be tied directly to the harm she caused and the values she abused. I imposed the maximum municipal fine allowed on the charges before me and ordered immediate restitution to Harold for lost wages from his missed shift the next night, transportation costs, and emotional harm as permitted by the ordinance. But I did not stop there. As a condition attached to the municipal resolution and license review recommendation, I ordered Harborline Diner closed for 1 Veterans Day observance cycle unless and until it completed a supervised public service program through the local Veterans Center. I further ordered Ms. Rivera herself, not a publicist, not a manager, to perform 300 hours of meal service at that center under written verification. Poetic justice matters when it teaches the lesson the offense tried to erase. Then I addressed the money in the room that had never been counted honestly. I referred the charity reimbursement records, the social media evidence, the internal messages, and the police intimidation issue to the proper criminal authorities for full investigation. I also ordered that any pending reimbursement to Harborline from the Rivera Community Heroes Fund be frozen immediately. Chief Rivera stood still as stone while I said that. Ms. Rivera looked at him as if she had just realized too late that family names are not shields in a courtroom, they are responsibilities. I told her, "You used a veteran's dignity as a prop, your father's office as leverage, and the public's generosity as a cash register. That is why this sentence is severe." Then I added, "But it is fair because I am not punishing your success, your clothes, your followers, or your last name. I am punishing your choices." She opened her mouth once as if to argue and then stopped. Speechless is a phrase people use too easily, but in that moment it was true. The woman who had come in wrapped in certainty could not produce a single word. So that is the story of the veteran denied a meal and the order that left the owner speechless. It was never just about food. It was about dignity, accountability, mercy, and the hard truth that fairness means nothing if it only protects the polished and the powerful. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If these stories matter to you, subscribe and leave a comment, because the next case I'll tell you about started with a broken tail light and ended with a truth that changed a family forever. The morning that case came into my courtroom, I felt the air change before anyone said a word. A teenage boy sat in the second row, wearing a pressed white shirt and holding a folded graduation tassel in his fist so tight his knuckles had gone pale. Across from him sat a woman dressed like she was walking into a magazine shoot, not a court of law, and the look on her face told me she still believed money could outrank truth. Before I even opened the file, I knew I wasn't looking at a simple complaint. I was looking at a young man who had been pushed out of one of the biggest days of his life, and I could already feel that somebody in that room had done it on purpose. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe and tell me in the comments whether you would have stayed quiet or fought your way into that courtroom, because what I heard that day still stays with me. It was Friday, June 13th, 2025, just after 9:10 in the morning, and the light coming through the high windows made the room look softer than it felt. My clerk placed the file in front of me, and I saw the words municipal complaint, false report, harassment, and reckless operation in a school zone. But what stood out to me most was the notepaper clipped to the cover, student barred from graduation pending review. That was the line that made me sit up straighter. When the defendant walked in, I looked at her carefully the way I always do because people tell you a great deal before they ever open their mouths. She wore a cream designer suit that was cut too sharp for a school employee, a gold Cartier watch that flashed every time she moved her wrist, and a perfume so strong I could smell it from the bench. A quilted black bag rested against her chair, and when she crossed her legs, I saw red-bottom shoes and the chrome Mercedes key fob in her hand. Her name was Monica Rivera, 38 years old, assistant principal at West Ferry High School, and if her body language meant anything, she had not come to explain herself, she had come to win. The victim sat quietly in the back, and I noticed him long before I called his name. He was older, 69, with shoulders that had started to round but eyes that still carried alertness and pride. His name was Harold Dempsey, and when he stood, he did it with the slow care of a man who had worked through pain more times than he had complained about it. He wore a plain navy blazer with a Vietnam veteran pin on the lapel, and his shoes had the kind of wear that told me they were polished often because he could not afford to replace them often. Next to him sat his grandson Daniel, 18 years old, still banned from his own graduation. When I looked at Monica Rivera, I could immediately tell she was used to rooms bending around her. When I looked at Harold, I saw the opposite. I saw a man who had spent a lifetime bending for other people and had finally reached a point where he could not do it one more time. As I read deeper into the complaint, I learned Harold had served in Vietnam from 1968 to 1971, had worked security at night as a bouncer at the Harborview Hall, and had picked up daytime shifts at the school because his daughter Elena suffered from severe asthma, and the medication alone cost more each month than many families spend on groceries. That kind of background is sacred to me because sacrifice should still mean something. Daniel's name appeared over and over in the report, even though he was not the one on trial that morning. He was valedictorian runner-up, captain of the robotics team, and the first in his family to finish high school on time while holding down a part-time job at Merino Auto on Broad Street. The report said he was banned from graduation after Monica claimed he had threatened her in the school parking lot and later attempted to return to campus in defiance of an administrative order. But here's what she didn't know when she filed that complaint. I pay attention to fear, and Daniel did not look like a violent young man trying to bluff his way out of trouble. He looked like a boy who had been humiliated in public and was using every ounce of strength just to sit there. I asked the officer to step forward first, because I wanted the bones of the case before I listened to the emotion. Officer Kevin Morales, badge number 4721, took the oath and held the report in his hand. He told me the original incident at West Ferry High had taken place on June 3, 2025, at 4:26 p.m. in the faculty parking lot near the gym entrance, and that the follow-up trespass complaint was logged on June 11th at 6:18 p.m., the night of graduation rehearsal. He spoke clearly, but I noticed he kept looking down at the paper instead of at me, and that always tells me a witness is trying not to step outside the lines that someone else has drawn for him. I asked him, "Officer, did you personally witness any threat from Daniel Dempsey?" He said, "No, Your Honor, I relied on the complainant's statement and school recommendation." That answer mattered. Monica sat there with one eyebrow raised, like procedure itself was all the proof she needed. I asked Officer Morales whether the report included any independent witness statements, and he said yes, one from Harold Dempsey and one from a cafeteria worker, but both had been marked inconsistent with administrative findings. That phrase made me stop. I asked him to repeat it, and he did. I said, "Officer, witnesses do not become less real because they disagree with administration." For the first time that morning, I saw Monica's jaw tighten. Harold came forward next, and I told him to take his time because I could see in his hands that he was shaking. He said that on June 3rd, Monica had pulled her black Mercedes GLE into a fire lane beside the gym, plate number RIHN-2741, while students and custodians were carrying stage pieces for graduation. He said he approached her politely and told her the lane had to stay open in case an ambulance needed access, especially because one of the band students had a history of seizures. According to Harold, she looked him up and down and said, "I'm not moving for a glorified parking guard." He told me Daniel had overheard that and taken out his phone only after Monica began shouting. So I watched Harold while he spoke because truth has a rhythm to it. He did not rush. He did not decorate. He stayed with the facts, even when the facts hurt him. He told me Monica jerked the Mercedes backward, clipped his left knee with the bumper, and then rolled over the edge of a cart carrying folded chairs, causing $842 in damage to school equipment, according to the maintenance estimate. He said Daniel yelled, "Stop the car," and started recording because he thought his grandfather had been hit harder than he first realized. Then Harold looked at me and said quietly, "Judge, the next morning my grandson was told he was a danger to the school." Daniel stepped forward after that and the whole room got still in a different way. Young people carry pain differently. Some get loud, some go blank. Daniel held it in so tightly I could almost hear it. He told me that after he recorded the incident, Monica demanded his phone and said he had no right to film staff on school grounds. He refused. He posted nothing that day, and by 8:14 the next morning he had been called into the office and handed a suspension notice for aggressive confrontation, digital harassment, and intimidation of administration. Then he looked at me and said, "Judge, I wasn't banned because I was dangerous. I was banned because I wouldn't delete what I saw." If you think you already know where this is going, subscribe and stay with me, because at that point even I did not know how ugly it was about to become. I asked Daniel whether he had threatened Monica in any form, by voice, text, post, or message. He said no, and he handed his phone to his attorney, who handed it up to the clerk with a printed export of his message log. The times were clean. The call history was clean. The only message he had sent after the incident was to his mother at 4:41 p.m. saying, "Grandpa got hit. I filmed it. They're gonna lie." That kind of message is not something a teenager invents after the fact. It had the shock of the moment inside it. Monica finally asked to speak, and I let her, because sometimes the fastest way to the truth is to give arrogance a microphone. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Your Honor, this boy has a social media obsession and a victim complex. He follows drama, he posts clips out of context, and he was repeatedly warned." I asked her whether she denied striking Harold with her vehicle, and she said, "I deny any meaningful contact." That phrase, "any meaningful contact," told me a lot. People who are innocent usually say what happened. People who are calculating often try to manage language. I asked Monica whether she had requested Daniel be barred from graduation. She did not even hesitate. She said yes, she had, because in her judgment his presence created a safety concern. I asked what that judgment was based on. She said he glared at her in a hallway, raised his voice in the parking lot, and inspired a flood of online abuse after what she called an edited clip began circulating. Then she added, "I have over 50,000 followers. I know what harassment campaigns look like." The way she said it, you would have thought follower count was a credential. That was the first moment I asked for the social media evidence itself. I did not want summaries. I wanted the real thing. Daniel's attorney produced screenshots from Monica's public Instagram and short clips from a live stream tied to her account, at Monica Knows Best. The follower count was visible, 50.3K. In one post from June 5th at 8:52 p.m. she wrote, "Leadership means protecting a school from unstable kids, even when weak adults get sentimental." She did not use Daniel's name, but the comments did. One comment said, "Is this the mechanic scholarship kid?" And another said, "Kick him off the stage." Monica had liked both. I leaned forward and asked her if that was her account. She said yes, but claimed the post was general. I asked her whether she routinely discussed active student discipline on a public platform. She said, "Nikeen, I speak in principles." I said, "No, ma'am, you speak in insinuations, and sometimes insinuations do the dirty work that direct statements would expose." She rolled her eyes so hard it was almost theatrical, and several people in the gallery shifted in their seats. I kept my voice calm, but inside I could feel the pressure building. Harold was called back because I wanted the record complete. I asked him about his daughter, and at first he seemed confused why I was asking. Then he understood I was trying to see the whole human cost of what had happened. He told me Elena's inhaler and steroid medication had gone up in price that year, and when she had a bad month, she could barely make it from the bedroom to the kitchen without losing her breath. He said Daniel had worked extra shifts after school to help with the bills, and graduation was supposed to be their one clean day, the day nobody could take from them. Then he looked down and said, "Judge, my grandson ironed that gown twice." The city prosecutor then directed my attention to a second report, one that had not been highlighted on the first read. It was a school incident summary entered by Vice Principal Lydia Chen at 7:03 a.m. on June 4th. And it described Harold as calm, Daniel as upset but cooperative, and Monica as highly agitated. I asked Officer Morales why that summary was not referenced in the final trespass recommendation. He swallowed once and said it was later superseded by administration. There was that word again, superseded. Truth is not supposed to be superseded. Evidence is supposed to be weighed. I took a deliberate pause because silence in a courtroom can do what shouting never will. I looked at Monica, then at Daniel, then at Harold. I thought about how often young people from working families are told to accept humiliation quietly if the person humiliating them wears the right clothes, uses the right language, or knows the right people. My voice stayed even when I said it, but I meant every word. "This court does not grade justice on a curve," I said, "and in my courtroom status is not evidence." Monica folded her arms and let out a little laugh through her nose. And that sound hit me harder than if she had shouted. It was the sound of a person who still believed the worst part of her day was inconvenience. But here's what she didn't know. While the morning session was going on, Daniel's attorney had sent a clerk to retrieve something from a student media advisor who had been trying to reach the court since early morning. Right around then, my clerk slipped me a note that said additional digital evidence had arrived from Cloud Backup. If you're curious why I suddenly stopped speaking and looked toward the side door, comment below. Because what came through that doorway changed the entire case. A young man from the school's media club walked in holding a district-issued tablet and a sealed envelope. He was pale but steady. I had him sworn in, and he told me his name was Aaron Fields, age 17, audio-visual team lead. He said the school auditorium cameras automatically backed up to a faculty cloud folder that students on technical crews could not usually access, but one folder had accidentally synced to a rehearsal tablet during setup. Inside were hallway clips from June 4th and June 11th. The city prosecutor asked that the clips be played in open court. The first video showed the parking lot from a side angle I had not expected. At 4:27 p.m. on June 3rd, I saw Monica's Mercedes angled into the fire lane exactly as Harold described. I saw Harold approach with one palm out, not aggressive, just signaling caution. I saw Monica reverse abruptly. I saw the bumper strike Harold's leg. It was not a crushing hit, but it was contact, and it was enough to make him stumble against the chair cart. Then I heard Daniel's voice from off-screen yell, "You hit him, don't leave." No threat, no intimidation, just alarm. The second clip hit harder. It was dated June 4th, 2025, 8:16 a.m., outside the assistant principal's office. The picture had no perfect sound, but it had enough. I saw Monica standing with Officer Morales near the doorway. I saw Daniel inside the room with his backpack on, shoulders tense. Then audio cleared for a few seconds, and I heard Monica say, "If he wants to act smart, write him up as a threat and let him miss the walk." I did not move. I did not speak. I just watched the room absorb what she had said. You could feel the courtroom change in that moment. Daniel's mother covered her mouth. Harold shut his eyes. Officer Morales stared at the floor. Monica leaned toward her attorney and whispered so fast I could not catch every word, but I did not need to. The truth had begun to show itself, and when truth begins to move, panic follows right behind it. I asked for the third clip. The third clip was dated June 11th, 5:54 p.m., less than half an hour before rehearsal. It showed Monica in a hallway speaking into her phone. Her tone was bright, almost playful. She said, "Yes, Chief, I know who he is. He's the veteran's grandson. That's why this has to be shut down cleanly." Then she laughed and added, "Once he's marked disruptive, he doesn't walk, and by tomorrow nobody cares." She did not know the camera over the trophy case had recorded all of it. The room went dead silent. That was when I realized the original complaint was only the front door of a much larger house. This was no longer just about a false report or a reckless move in a school zone. It was about abuse of authority, witness suppression, retaliation against a student, and what looked very much like an effort to use a police relationship to give a lie official weight. The city prosecutor stood and asked for a short recess to consult with his office. I told him to stay exactly where he was. I wanted the record open. Monica's attorney tried to interrupt, but Monica beat him to it. She looked up at me, her face now flushed and sharp, and said something that I will never forget. She said, "This is why small courts are a joke. You get emotional, you grandstand for broke people, and you think a few grainy clips make you important." I felt my hand tighten around the edge of the bench, not because she had insulted me, but because contempt for the poor had spilled right out of her in plain sight. I let 1 second pass, no more, and then I said, "You will not speak that way in my courtroom." I've learned over many years that anger from the bench is usually useless, but firmness is not. I did not raise my voice. I lowered it. That always makes people listen. I told Monica that insulting me would not help her, but insulting the dignity of the people harmed by her conduct had already hurt her more than she understood. Then I looked at the prosecutor and said, "I'm directing that the digital devices, cloud records, and all related school communications be preserved immediately." After that, I made a decision right there to call in Major Elena Santos from the State Police Internal Affairs Unit, because what I had just seen went far beyond school discipline. While we waited, I kept the record moving. I asked Officer Morales directly whether he had heard Monica tell him to write Daniel up as a threat. He hesitated so long I could hear papers shifting in the gallery. Then he said, "Yes, Your Honor." I asked why he omitted that from his report. He said, "I felt pressure." I asked pressure from whom. His face turned red, and he answered, "From the complainant's family connection." He did not say Rivera, but he did not have to. Major Santos arrived faster than I expected, maybe 12 minutes after my clerk placed the call. She came in wearing a dark suit, badge on her belt, and the kind of expression I have seen on good investigators when they know they are walking into something dirty. I summarized the matter for the record, had the video clips marked, and asked her to observe what had already been admitted. She watched the June 11th clip without blinking. When it ended, she asked one question in open court. "Is Chief Rivera the defendant's father?" Monica did not answer. Her attorney did not answer. Silence answered for them. Then another layer broke open. Aaron Fields, the student media lead, said there was one more item in the sealed envelope. A printed chain of access report from the school disciplinary portal. According to the log, the anonymous threat message that had been cited to justify Daniel's graduation ban was not sent from Daniel's phone at all. It had been entered into the system from an administrator desktop inside Monica's office suite at 7:41 a.m. on June 11th. The user account name was partially redacted, but the last login on the system before submission belonged to Monsieur Rivera, admin. I saw Monica's face drain of color. This is the part where some people expect a judge to explode. I did not. I leaned back and let the facts finish speaking. Daniel had not threatened anybody. Harold had not invented anything. A woman with status, followers, and a police chief father had tried to bury a kid from a working family because he recorded her bad act and would not surrender the proof. Worse than that, she had used the machinery of discipline to try to erase his future on the very day he was supposed to celebrate it. If you've ever believed ordinary people need a place where power finally gets told no, subscribe, join this community, and stay with me, because the next few minutes were the reason courts must never become theaters for influence. I asked Daniel one question, and I asked it softly. Did you still want to walk at graduation if the ban was lifted? He swallowed hard and said, yes, sir, even if it's just me and my family in the room. That answer got me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was humble. He was not asking for revenge. He was asking for his life back. Harold reached over and put a hand on his shoulder, and I saw that old veteran steadying a young man who should never have had to prove his right to wear his own cap and gown. I then confronted Monica as clearly and fairly as I knew how. I said, Ms. Rivera, you had every chance this morning to tell the truth. You chose posture over honesty, influence over duty, and humiliation over leadership. She tried to say the videos were misleading, the login could have been shared, the comments were out of context. But her voice had changed, the swagger was gone. Her words were faster, thinner, and full of holes. Fear had finally reached her. Major Santos requested temporary custody of the devices and records, and I granted it on the spot under the authority available to preserve evidence connected to a possible criminal referral. The city prosecutor moved to dismiss the trespass basis against Daniel and asked leave to amend the municipal complaint against Monica to include false statement implications tied to the original filing. I granted that as well. Then I asked the clerk to contact the school superintendent, Dr. Elaine Mercer, who happened to be at the district administration building less than 10 minutes away. I wanted no more paperwork tricks. I wanted the human damage addressed before the day ended. While we waited for Dr. Mercer, I turned back to Harold. I asked him what he wanted most from that courtroom. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, Judge, I just want justice. I'm too old for revenge. Those words sat in the room like something holy. A lot of people talk about justice as if it is thunder. Most of the time it is not. Most of the time it is an exhausted, good man, asking only for the truth to stop being stepped on. I never forget moments like that. Dr. Mercer arrived at 10:41 a.m., and I placed her under oath because this was no longer a courtesy visit. I asked her whether the school district had lawful authority to ban a student from graduation based on an unverified administrative allegation. She said no, not without documented review and due process. I showed her the portal log, the video clips, and the June 4th summary that had been superseded out of existence. Her face changed as she read. Then I asked her the question that mattered most. As superintendent, are you prepared to correct this today? She said, yes, Your Honor, immediately. That was the moment the courtroom exhaled. Daniel's mother began to cry quietly. Harold took off his glasses and wiped his eyes with the side of his thumb like a man trying not to be seen grieving in public. Monica stared straight ahead, motionless now. No eye roll left, no smirk left, no shield left. I could almost see her understanding for the first time that every luxury item she had worn into my courtroom had become useless weight. The watch could not buy time back. The bag could not carry her out of truth. The name Rivera could not stop the record from speaking. Then came the question of penalty, and I took my time with it because punishment without explanation is just theater. I told Monica that the law had to do two things at once that day. It had to protect the dignity of the harmed, and it had to make clear that using privilege as a weapon against the powerless is itself a serious injury. I explained that her conduct was harsh, deliberate, and layered: reckless operation in a school safety lane, physical contact with an elderly employee, retaliatory use of school discipline, public social media humiliation, and the appearance of manipulated reporting tied to personal connections. That is not a lapse. That is a pattern. So I imposed a sentence that fit the wrong she had done. On the municipal counts before me, I levied the maximum fine permitted, ordered full restitution for Harold's medical visit, the damaged school equipment, and lost wages from the security shifts he missed, and I required 200 hours of community service. But I did not send her to just any service site. I ordered that the service be performed, subject to program approval, at the Providence Veterans Resource Center and at a district mentoring program for first-generation students. That was the poetic part, and I said it plainly. You tried to shame a veteran's family and steal a student's milestone. Now you will spend your time serving the kind of people you look down on. I also entered formal findings into the record recommending immediate administrative suspension pending district review and criminal referral on the evidence preservation issues for the proper authorities to examine. I was careful with my words because a judge must never pretend authority he does not have. But I do have authority to speak clearly when I see conduct that threatens public trust. So I said, leadership is not a crown you wear. It is a duty you either honor or disgrace. Monica's eyes filled then, but not with the kind of tears that ask for mercy. They were the tears of a person meeting consequence after a long friendship with escape. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, subscribe and leave a comment, because I read those thoughts with gratitude, and they remind me why these moments matter beyond the walls of any one room. And if you think this case was unforgettable, wait until I tell you about the father who lied under oath to save his son and ended up exposing a family secret no one in that courtroom was prepared to hear. You know, people always ask me the same question. They want to know if I still get surprised in my courtroom after all these years on the bench. The honest answer is yes, but not in the way you would think. Most surprises do not come from some big legal bombshell or a famous attorney showing up. The surprises come from people, from what they say when they think nobody important is listening, from what they post when they think nobody smart is watching. I remember one morning, a woman walked into my courtroom wearing about $12,000 worth of accessories, and by lunchtime she had sued herself by mistake, insulted me to my face, and learned a lesson she will carry for the rest of her life. Before I tell you about it, hit that subscribe button right now if you enjoy stories where the truth catches up to somebody in real time, and drop me a comment telling me exactly what you would have done if you were the judge sitting in my chair. I read every single one, and you keep me honest. The morning this all started was November 11th, 2023, Veterans Day. I remember looking at the calendar on my bench and feeling that quiet kind of weight you feel when you know the room is going to hold a story that matters. The sun was coming through the high windows of the Providence courthouse, and my clerk had stacked 11 cases on my docket that morning. Most of them were the usual small stuff: parking tickets, overdue fines, a couple of disorderly conduct summons, nothing that gets the heart racing. But case number 7 was a civil suit, and when I read the complaint, I stopped and read it again. A young woman was suing a 70-year-old man for $47,000. She claimed he had attacked her in a parking lot at 10:47 at night. I knew right then that something about this case was going to stick with me, because grown-ups do not sue 70-year-old men for $47,000 over a parking lot scrap unless they think they can get away with it. Act 1. By 9:15, my courtroom was mostly full, and I called the civil case. A young woman stood up from the plaintiff's table and walked toward my bench like she was arriving at a fashion show instead of a place where truth is supposed to matter. Her name was Karen Rivera, 28 years old, and the first thing I noticed was her perfume. It smelled expensive, like something you only smell in the lobby of a 4-star hotel. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer that looked freshly pressed, dark sunglasses she had pushed up onto her head like a crown, and a leather bag I could see from the bench that was a real Chanel. The bag had the quilted pattern and the gold chain, and the little authenticity card was even sticking out of the pocket. On her wrist sat a Cartier watch that caught the light every time she moved her hand, and her fingers carried 2 diamond rings that looked like they cost more than some of the cars in the parking lot outside. When she sat down, she put the bag on the table like she was staking a claim, and she looked past me like I was just another piece of furniture she had already decided to ignore. When I looked at the defendant, I could immediately tell this was not going to be a regular traffic ticket conversation. The defendant sat quietly in the back, and I noticed right away that he did not belong with the kind of money sitting across from him. His name was Harold Bennett, 69 years old, and he was wearing the same kind of faded Marine Corps cap I had learned to recognize a long time ago. He had served in Vietnam from 1968 to 1971, and he walked with the kind of careful steps a man walks with when his knees remember things his mouth does not say. He was wearing a plain collared shirt, dark pants that had been pressed, but not recently, and a small American flag pin on his lapel that his granddaughter had given him for Father's Day. When Harold looked up at me, his eyes were tired but steady, the way eyes get when a man has been polite his whole life. He worked as a bouncer at a small veterans hall in Providence, and he had told my clerk he could not afford a lawyer. His daughter lived with him, and she had severe asthma that needed medicine, costing him almost $400 every single month. He had never sued anybody in his life. He had never even been sued, and now at 69, somebody was trying to drain him for $47,000. The complaint in front of me said the incident happened at 10:47 p.m. on October 24, 2023, in the parking lot of a restaurant called Bella's on Hope Street. According to the paperwork, Karen had claimed Harold pushed her, knocked her down, and caused her serious injuries, including a sprained wrist, a bruised shoulder, and emotional distress that she said was worth $12,000 on its own. She was asking for $25,000 in medical costs, $15,000 in lost wages, and $7,000 for what her attorney called pain and humiliation. But I noticed something strange when I read the bottom of the complaint. The defendant listed on the paperwork was not Harold Bennett at all. The defendant listed was a company called Rivera Holdings, LLC, and the address on the document was the same address Karen had walked into my courtroom from that morning. I asked my clerk to pull the property records on Rivera Holdings, LLC, and within 4 minutes I had my answer. Rivera Holdings, LLC was a small family business registered to Karen and her father, a man named Robert Rivera. And Robert Rivera happened to be the police chief of the neighboring town of Cranston. The first woman in my courtroom that day was about to discover she had sued her own father's company. She just did not know it yet. I looked at the date of the complaint one more time, and I could see she had filed the suit just 8 days before her own birthday. I do not mention that to be mean, but I do mention it because in almost 3 decades on the bench, I have learned something about people who sue other people. The ones who genuinely get hurt file claims quietly, with shaking hands, asking only for what they really need. The ones who are playing a game file claims loudly, with confidence, asking for more than they ever lost. I could see the difference in the room. Karen was sitting up straight, posture perfect, phone in her hand, scrolling while her attorney droned on. Harold was sitting up straight too, but his posture told a different story. His shoulders were tight, his hands were folded in his lap, and he was looking at me like a man who wanted nothing in the world except to be told the truth. I made a small note on my pad, and I decided right then that this case was going to get my full attention, because that is what heroes like Harold Bennett deserve. Act 2. I called Officer Daniel Mendez to the stand, and he walked up like a man who had done this 1,000 times before. His badge number was 4721, and he had been a Providence police officer for 19 years. He told me he had been the one to respond to the Bella's parking lot at 10:47 p.m. on October 24, 2023, after a 911 call came in about a fight between 2 people. He said when he arrived, he found Karen sitting on the curb, holding her left wrist, with one shoe off, shouting into her phone. He said Harold was standing about 15 feet away, hands open at his sides, looking confused and worried. Officer Mendez told me Harold had not been drinking, had cooperated fully, and had told the same story 3 separate times word for word, which is the kind of pattern officers learn to recognize as truth. Karen's story had changed 6 times between the parking lot and my courtroom. I asked Officer Mendez, "Did you see Harold push Karen?" And he looked me in the eye and said, "Your Honor, I did not. I saw her stumble on her own shoe after she lost her balance during the argument. The man never raised a hand." Karen's attorney stood up and objected, but I let him sit back down because what Officer Mendez had just said matched every other piece of paper in front of me. That is when Karen lost her patience. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Your Honor, with all due respect, Officer Mendez clearly has a bias. My father is Police Chief Robert Rivera of Cranston, and I am sure once I make one phone call, this case will be reassigned to a more suitable judge." She said it out loud, in open court, with her father sitting 2 rows behind her. I did not move. I did not look down. I let the room get quiet for about 3 seconds, which in a courtroom feels like 300, and then I said, "Ms. Rivera, in my courtroom, every citizen is equal. That includes your father, that includes you, and that includes the gentleman sitting behind your attorney. If you have evidence that Officer Mendez is biased, you may present it. Otherwise, you will address me as Your Honor, and you will not threaten this courtroom with phone calls. Do we understand each other?" She nodded, and I could see in her eyes that this was not how things normally went for her. But before I went any further with the facts, I want to stop and ask you something real. Imagine you are sitting right where I'm sitting. Picture a 28-year-old in $12,000 of accessories accusing a 69-year-old Vietnam veteran of attacking her in a parking lot. Would you have believed her just because she had a Chanel bag and a Cartier watch, or would you have asked the same questions I asked? Drop your honest answer in the comments below, even if it stings a little. I read every single one. Some days the comments help me remember why I still love this job after all these years. I called Harold Bennett to the stand, and he walked up slowly, taking each step one at a time. He raised his right hand to swear in, and I could see his knuckles were scarred, the way old soldiers' knuckles always are. He told me he had been working the door at the Veterans Hall that night, dressed in his old security jacket, trying to keep the peace after a couple of patrons got too loud. He said Karen had pulled into the parking lot in a black Mercedes SUV with temporary paper plates, swung open her door, and walked right past the rope he had set up to redirect foot traffic. He said he had simply put his hand out and said, "Ma'am, this side is closed. Please use the front entrance." He said Karen had rolled her eyes at him, called him Grandpa, and kept walking. He said when he stepped forward to follow her, she turned around fast and the heel of her own shoe caught the curb. That is when she fell. That is when she started screaming. He told me he never touched her. He told me he never even raised his voice. He told me with a steady voice, "Judge, I have been a Marine, I have been a bouncer, I have been a grandfather, and I have never once hit a woman in my life." Karen's attorney tried to interrupt 3 times during Harold's testimony, and each time I let him speak but kept my eyes on Karen. I noticed something that made me grip my gavel a little tighter. While Harold was telling his story, Karen rolled her eyes, looked down at her phone, and even laughed once under her breath. She whispered something to the man sitting next to her, and the man smiled. She did not realize that I could see her in my peripheral vision, but I could. I have sat in this chair for almost 3 decades, and I have seen every human reaction there is. I have seen people cry, I have seen people faint, I have seen people curse me out under their breath, but I have never gotten used to disrespect shown in my courtroom, especially toward a man who had served his country. When Harold finished, I thanked him by his full name, asked him to step down, and watched the way he walked back to his seat. He walked slowly, eyes down, like a man who had been dealing with this kind of accusation for too long. Then I asked Karen to present her medical records. Her attorney handed me a folder with 3 reports from one clinic, and I read every line. The first report was from a doctor who wrote down, "Patient reports pain in left wrist," but the actual X-ray showed nothing broken, only mild swelling. The second report said, "Patient reports shoulder discomfort," and again the doctor's notes showed no fracture, no tear, nothing objective at all. The third report was for emotional distress, and the doctor had written that the patient had declined further evaluation. I looked at Karen and said, "Ms. Rivera, the medical reports show swelling, not injury. They show discomfort, not damage. They show that you declined to be examined further. Can you tell me how $25,000 in medical costs came from these 3 reports?" She stared at me for several seconds without answering. Then she said, "Your Honor, those numbers were given to me by my attorney." I thanked her for her honesty and pushed the folder to the side of my bench. The math was not adding up, and the air in the courtroom felt like it was about to change. Now I want you to guess what I was about to do. I am not going to tell you yet, but I will tell you this. By the time you reach the end of the next part of this story, you are going to understand exactly why Karen walked out of my courtroom in tears. Comment below what you think happened to her, and I will tell you in the next story if you guessed right. Act 3. ACT. I asked Karen if she had a phone with her, and she immediately froze. I told her I was not going to search it without her permission, but I was going to give her one chance to produce any video or photographs from the night of October 24th. She hesitated, then said she had nothing to share. So I asked my clerk to bring up Karen's public Instagram account, which she had linked on her own witness disclosure form a week earlier. As soon as the page loaded, I could see the profile picture showed the same Chanel bag, the same Cartier watch, and the same kind of attitude I had been dealing with all morning. The account had just over 50,000 followers, and the bio read, "Boss Lover of Luxury, Cranston born and raised." I asked my clerk to scroll to October 25th, 2023, the morning after the parking lot incident, and there it was waiting for me. A selfie reel, 16 seconds long, captioned, "Defending myself from a creepy old man who tried to touch me at a club last night. Joke's on him, I'm pressing charges." The video had over 14,000 likes. I asked my clerk to play the reel on the courtroom screen, and the room went quiet. In the video, Karen was holding her phone up in selfie mode, smiling at first, then turning the camera toward the parking lot. The footage showed a thin older man in a security jacket, hands open at his sides, walking slowly away from her. He was not chasing her. He was not touching her. He was not even facing her. She turned the camera back to herself, rolled her eyes like a teenager, and said into the lens, "Grandpa energy is not it tonight." Then she turned to walk away, and the heel of her own stiletto caught the edge of the curb. She pitched forward, and the video cut off mid-fall, with Karen shrieking into the camera. There was no push. There was no shove. There was no contact of any kind. The video was time-stamped 10:48 p.m., exactly 1 minute after Officer Mendez's report had placed the call. I looked at Karen and said, "Ms. Rivera, would you please explain to this court why you sued a man for $47,000 when the only footage in existence shows that he never touched you and you fell because of your own shoe?" Karen stared at the floor. Her attorney whispered something to her. She shook her head and said, "Your Honor, that video does not show everything that happened before." I told her I would be happy to hear what happened before and that I was listening. She said, "There is nothing else to say." I felt my grip tighten on my gavel. At that moment, I made a decision that surprised even my clerk. I asked my clerk to call the Cranston Police Department and request that Police Chief Robert Rivera come to my courtroom within the next 90 minutes. The room went so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall. Karen's eyes went wide and her attorney stood up and said, "Your Honor, that is highly irregular." I looked him in the eye and said, "Counselor, the witness disclosure form lists his cell phone number, his private email, and his direct office line. His daughter put it there, not me. If you would like to object to your own client filling out her own paperwork, you may do so at the proper time." And then, before I could call the next witness, Karen leaned over to her attorney and said something I could barely hear. But I heard it. Her attorney tried to wave it away, but I said, "I'm sorry, Ms. Rivera, can you repeat that? The court reporter needs to hear it, and so does this courtroom." She looked up at me, and her face had changed. The confidence was gone. The Chanel bag was no longer on her lap. She was gripping the edge of the table, and her voice cracked as she said, "I said, you little bench warmer, you don't even know what you're doing. My father will end your career before lunch." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Then I said, "Ms. Rivera, that is the second time you have mentioned your father in this courtroom, and I want you to know something very clearly. In my courtroom, the size of your father's badge does not change the weight of your testimony. You will sit down. You will be quiet. You will let the process happen. And if your father wants to have this conversation with me, he can do it when he gets here. Do we understand each other?" She nodded. The courtroom was stunned. ACT 4. 47 minutes later, the side door of my courtroom opened, and in walked Police Chief Robert Rivera. He was wearing his full dress uniform, the silver badge polished, the brass on his collar shining, and a stack of papers under his arm that I later learned were the actual corporate tax filings for Rivera Holdings, LLC. He had not been summoned by me alone. Within the last 20 minutes, my clerk had also received a hand-delivered envelope from the Rhode Island Department of Revenue, marked Confidential, listing 3 years of suspicious deductions tied to a holding company registered at Karen's apartment. The envelope had been opened in my chambers, and now it was sitting on my bench in a sealed folder. Chief Rivera walked up to the witness stand, raised his right hand, and swore in. The first thing he said to me was, "Your Honor, I did not know my daughter had filed this lawsuit until this morning. I am here to tell you the truth about everything she has done in my name." The courtroom shifted in their chairs. I asked him about Rivera Holdings, LLC, and he told me the truth about the parking lot at Bella's on Hope Street. Rivera Holdings LLC owns the property. Rivera Holdings LLC is the registered defendant in this case. Rivera Holdings LLC is the entity Karen filed suit against as the owner of the parking lot where she fell. In other words, Karen Rivera had sued her own father's company for damages that happened on her own family's property, blaming a Vietnam veteran for an injury she inflicted on herself with her own shoe. Chief Rivera looked at his daughter in the gallery and said, "Karen, I built this for our family, and you used it as a weapon." Karen's face turned white. I asked Chief Rivera if there was anything else he wanted the court to know. He handed me the tax filing folder and said, "Your Honor, there is more. These are the deductions my daughter wrote off as business losses in the last 3 years. Most of them are the same kind of insurance claims filed under false pretenses. There is at least one more victim I know of, a 61-year-old woman from Warwick, who was scared into paying a private settlement last summer. I am formally requesting that the State Attorney General open an investigation into Rivera Holdings LLC, and I am asking this court to refer the matter immediately." I looked at Karen's attorney. He looked down at his shoes. I looked at Karen. She was gripping the table with both hands now, and her Chanel bag had slid off her lap onto the floor. Her eyes were wet, but no tears had fallen yet. I took a slow breath, and I delivered the sentence. "Ms. Karen Rivera, the court finds that you have filed a fraudulent lawsuit against your own family's company, falsely accusing a 69-year-old Vietnam veteran of an assault that the only video evidence proves never happened. I am dismissing your case in its entirety with prejudice. I am fining you $7,500 for filing a false claim under oath, payable to the Providence Veterans Relief Fund, not to Harold Bennett directly, because I want you to look at the name on the check every single month for the next 3 years. I am requiring 200 hours of community service at the Providence 5A Hospital, where Harold volunteers on Tuesdays. I am naming you on a public docket of fraudulent filers, and I am forwarding the Rivera Holdings LLC tax filings to the Rhode Island Department of Revenue and the Office of the Attorney General. And finally, I am restoring the dignity of Harold Bennett out loud, in this courtroom, in front of every person who came in here believing your story was true." I let the silence sit for a long moment. Then I said, "Do you have anything to say?" Karen opened her mouth and closed it. She looked at her father. She looked at Harold. She looked at me. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." I said, "Speak up. Speak to Harold. Speak to this courtroom." She stood up, hands shaking, and said louder, "I'm sorry, Harold. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I ruined it. I ruined everything." I nodded and I said, "Mr. Bennett, do you have anything to say to this court?" Harold looked up at me with those tired, steady eyes and said, "Your Honor, I just wanted somebody to believe me." I told him, "Mr. Bennett, I believe you. I believe you today. I believed you this morning, and I will believe you for the rest of your life. You are cleared of every charge, and you walk out of here a free man with your name intact." Harold nodded, and for the first time all day, his shoulders dropped. This is the part of the case I want to tell the people watching at home about. If you have ever watched a courtroom show and thought, it can never really happen like that, I want you to know that it can, and that sometimes the powerful lose not because a judge punished them, but because the facts punish them. If you have ever watched somebody weaker than you get pushed around and you wanted to help but didn't know how, hit the subscribe button and share this story with somebody who needs to hear it today. Communities like the one we are building here are how we push back against the Karens of the world. Closing. When I bang my gavel on a case like this, I do not do it because I enjoy being harsh. I do it because in my courtroom, mercy without accountability is just a gift to the next person who gets hurt. Harold Bennett served his country in a war half a century ago, and he served his family every single day since. He came into my courtroom on Veterans Day, expecting to be punished for something he never did, and he walked out with his name cleared and his dignity returned. Karen Rivera walked in wearing $12,000 worth of accessories and walked out owing a debt to the same veterans she tried to destroy. That is not cruelty. That is balance. That is what justice looks like in a room that treats every person the same, including a man with a faded Marine Corps cap and a woman with a Cartier watch. My father taught me a long time ago that a judge is only as good as the way he treats the smallest person in his courtroom, and I carry that with me every single morning I put on this robe. If Karen's story taught us anything, it is that the truth does not need a fancy bag or a famous father to win. It just needs a judge willing to listen and a community willing to believe the quiet man in the back row. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you do not miss what comes next Tuesday. I am going to tell you about a man named Sal who walked into my courtroom accused of stealing bread to feed his grandchildren, and what happened when the store owner showed up with a different story in his hand. Trust me, you do not want to miss that one. Until then, thank you for sitting with me at the bench today, and I will see you in the next story. In more than 40 years on that bench, I have learned something most people do not really understand until life forces it on them. Power does not always shout. Sometimes it smirks. Sometimes it wears a beautiful suit, a polished watch, and a last name that opens doors before a word is spoken. And sometimes the people with the least in this world are the ones carrying the most goodness in their hearts. I thought I had seen everything after all these years in that courtroom, but then one Tuesday morning in Providence, a young millionaire looked down at a tired woman who had spent her life saving other people, and what happened next still sits heavy in my chest. I still get quiet thinking about it. I still feel my eyes sting a little when I remember the way she stood there, exhausted, alone, holding herself together with nothing but dignity. Are you with me so far? Then do me a favor right now and subscribe, because what happened that day did not just punish one spoiled young man. It reminded me why I stayed on that bench all these years. It reminded me why mercy matters and why mercy without truth is just weakness dressed up to look noble. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day, because when I say it shook me, I mean it shook something old and deep inside me. It brought back my father's voice. It brought back the reason I first believed the law could still be a place where ordinary people were seen. I was 82 years old that fall, and by then I had been on the bench since 1985. 40 years changes a man. It teaches you to listen slower. It teaches you that anger can be useful if it is clean, but dangerous if it is selfish. It teaches you that every face in front of you is carrying a burden you cannot always see. Some people walk in angry, some walk in ashamed, some walk in with so much fear in their bodies they can barely breathe. But every now and then somebody walks in with contempt, and contempt to me is one of the ugliest things a human being can wear. That morning began the way most of my mornings begin. At 5:30 a.m. sharp, my eyes opened before the alarm. They still do that. Old habits stay with you if you let them. Joyce was still asleep beside me, and after 48 years of marriage, I can tell by the sound of her breathing whether she had a restful night or not. That morning was gentle, steady, peaceful. I lay there for a minute, staring into the dim light coming through the curtains, and I said a quiet thank you, the way I often do. At my age, gratitude is no longer abstract. It is daily bread. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and walked to the kitchen in my robe. I make my coffee the same way every day, strong and black, no sugar, no cream, just coffee that means what it says. My father used to laugh at that and say, "Frank, if the spoon stands up by itself, then maybe it is strong enough." He came to this country from Italy with $8 in his pocket, rough hands, and a belief that a man's real worth had nothing to do with what he owned. He worked construction, he came home tired, he carried himself with quiet pride. And from him I learned one lesson that never left me. When life gives you power over another person, use it wisely, use it with mercy, but never use mercy to help cruelty walk away smiling. Outside, the morning was gray and wet. One of those Rhode Island mornings where the sky hangs low and the air smells like cold stone and rain. By 6:05 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, half a piece of toast, and the habit I have kept for years of looking over my notes before the day begins. Joyce came in a little later, wearing her blue robe, her hair softly pinned back, and she gave me the same look she has given me for decades, warm, knowing, patient. She asked me if I had slept well. I told her well enough. She poured herself tea and said, "You have that face already." I laughed and asked her what face. She said, "The one that means you're going to carry somebody else's pain today." That is Joyce. She sees things before I say them. She always has. We raised children together. We have grandchildren now. We have lived through joy, losses, hard years, funny years, all of it. And when you have shared that much life with someone, they begin to read your silences better than your words. Before I left, she touched my arm and said, "Be kind where you can, Frank. Be strong where you have to." That is as close to a sermon as you will get before 7 o'clock in the morning in my house. I left home at 7:22 a.m. The windshield caught tiny drops of rain all the way into Providence. The radio was low. I do not like a lot of noise before court. I like to think. I like to let the day arrive slowly in my mind. On the drive in, I passed the little corners of the city I've known for decades. A bakery opening its doors, a bus stop with 3 people hunched in jackets against the damp wind, a school crossing guard in a neon vest. Small scenes, ordinary scenes. But I've always believed justice begins by remembering who the law is for. Not the powerful alone, not the polished alone. It is for the woman waiting in the rain, too. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:15 a.m. sharp, the way I almost always do. That building has its own smell. Old wood, paper, a little dust, floor polish, coffee from some back office, and the quiet tension of people waiting for judgment. My clerk, Christina, was already there. She had been with me 23 years, and by now she knew my moods the way a great musician knows tempo. She could tell by how I hung my coat whether I was lighthearted, tired, or carrying something heavy. She had a way of setting a file down without dramatics when she wanted me to notice it. "Morning, Judge," she said. "Morning, Christina." She handed me the first stack of files, neat as always, yellow tabs, clean notes. She wore reading glasses low on her nose and had that calm, organized way about her that can keep a courtroom from drifting into chaos. If someone cried, Christina somehow had tissues nearby before they even reached for one. If a lawyer tried to bury something important in jargon, she would mark it in the margin in plain language. Every courtroom needs competence like that. It is a kind of mercy, too. My courtroom was never grand. That mattered to me. It was modest in size, with wooden benches polished by years of restless hands and nervous waiting. The flags stood where they always stood. The seal hung above the bench. The light in that room changed with the weather, and on rainy mornings it had a softer tone, almost as if the city itself understood people did not come there on their best days. I loved that courtroom because it kept things human-sized. No marble distance, no theatrical majesty, just a room where stories were told and decisions had to mean something. I sat down before the session and looked out at the empty seats slowly filling. I always do that. I study faces before names. Faces tell you things, not everything, but enough to remind you to listen. My philosophy has never been complicated. Every person who walks through that door has a story, and that story matters. Rules matter, yes, laws matter, procedure matters, but rules serve people. People do not exist to serve rules. When judges forget that, courts become machines, and machines cannot do justice. They can only process. That Tuesday was October 14, 2025. The docket began at 9 a.m. Christina placed a file on top with a yellow sticky note that simply said, "Unusual." Underneath it was the case name, City of Providence versus Marcus Whitmore III. Case number 25-TC-74321, with related counts filed under Providence Municipal Code 12-304, Rhode Island General Laws Section 31-21-11 for obstruction of an emergency access lane and Section 11-32-1 for filing a false police report. There were attached statements from hospital staff, security logs, and one self-represented witness appearance by a woman named Rita Alvarez. Christina tapped the file with one finger. "This one has calls around it," she said quietly. "What kind of calls?" "The kind that start with, 'I'm sure the judge would want to know,'" she said. I looked at her over my glasses. "And did the judge want to know?" She gave me the smallest smile. "The judge wants to know what is in the file. That is why I trusted her." We started with the ordinary morning cases first. Parking fines, registration lapses, a young man with no insurance who had just lost his job and was trying to keep his mother's car on the road. An older woman who had 3 tickets because her husband had dementia and she had been sleeping in hospital chairs instead of checking meters. A delivery driver who spoke broken English but came with every receipt in a plastic folder. I can be compassionate. I can also be firm. One young fellow had 5 moving violations in 6 months and thought shrugging was a defense. It was not. By 10:12 a.m. the room had settled into that familiar rhythm. Papers shuffling, quiet coughs, small sighs, the music of ordinary accountability, and then I saw him. I spotted Marcus Whitmore III before Christina ever called his case. Some people announce themselves without meaning to. He sat in the second row at the defense table as if the furniture belonged to him. 24 years old, but carrying himself with the tired arrogance of a man who had never once been told no in a way that mattered. He wore a navy blue Brioni suit that I later learned cost about $15,000. His tie was Hermes, His loafers were Gucci, polished so bright they caught the courtroom lights. On his left wrist was a rose gold Patek Philippe watch that could have paid a month of rent for several families, maybe more. A pristine Louis Vuitton briefcase sat beside him like a prop in a play called Privilege. His hair had that expensive, careless look money pays for, perfectly styled to appear untouched. He kept checking his phone, not glancing, checking, thumbs moving, smirking once or twice at something on the screen. Beside him sat his attorney, Charles Pembroke, a polished corporate lawyer with silver cufflinks and the alert look of a man already worried about his client's mouth. In the gallery behind them were two young men in tailored jackets who looked like handlers or friends, and one woman with giant sunglasses pushed up on her head though she was indoors. They had the bored discomfort of people who think court is something unpleasant that happens to other people. And then, 3 benches back on the right, sitting alone, was Rita Alvarez. She was 52 years old, senior EMT at Rhode Island Hospital, 23 years of service. She wore her Navy EMT uniform because she had come straight from a double shift. There was a small coffee stain near her left pocket. Her sleeves were wrinkled. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple ponytail. There were dark circles under her eyes that no powder could hide, if she had cared to try. She carried a worn canvas tote bag. No lawyer, no entourage, no expensive briefcase. Just papers, a pen, and the look I have seen on good people who are tired but determined. She did not scan the room for sympathy. She did not perform her pain. She sat quietly, like someone used to saving her energy for real emergencies. I remember thinking to myself that if a stranger had walked in and I asked them which of those two people had done something worthy, they would have known in 10 seconds. Sometimes character shows up before testimony ever begins. At 10:47 a.m., Christina called the case. Case number 25-TC-74321, City of Providence versus Marcus Whitmore III. Marcus stood slowly, almost annoyed that the room expected him to participate. His lawyer rose with him. Rita stood at the witness side, clutching her papers. The municipal prosecutor was present for the city counts, but Rita was there because Marcus's false complaint had forced her to defend her own name in connected proceedings. That mattered to me. It changed the temperature of the room. I adjusted my glasses and read from the file. Mr. Whitmore, the court has before it allegations that on Saturday, September 27, 2025, at approximately 6:41 p.m., you parked a bright orange Lamborghini Huracan in the ambulance receiving lane outside Rhode Island Hospital Emergency Department at 593 Eddy Street, Providence, Rhode Island. The vehicle remained in that emergency zone until 10:58 p.m., a total of 4 hours and 17 minutes during active ambulance intake. The court also has before it a related allegation that you knowingly filed a false police report at 12:18 a.m. on September 28th, accusing Ms. Rita Alvarez of vandalizing your vehicle and stealing property. Do you understand the charges? He looked at his lawyer before he looked at me. That told me plenty. Then he said, I understand the overreaction. There was a low stir in the gallery. I said, This is a courtroom, Mr. Whitmore, not a podcast interview. Answer the question asked. His lawyer stepped in quickly. Your Honor, my client understands the charges. Marcus gave a little eye roll. Not large enough to deny, not small enough to miss. I looked straight at him. And you will put your phone away right now. He glanced down as if surprised I had noticed. I did not ask what you were just doing. Put it away. He put it face down on the table with the expression of a child asked to sit through dinner without a toy. The prosecutor summarized the city's case first. Hospital security logs showed repeated pages to move the vehicle at 7:03 p.m., 7:18 p.m., 7:44 p.m., 8:12 p.m., 9:06 p.m., and 10:31 p.m. 2 security officers had photographed the plate. Sergeant Daniel Keene, badge number 417, Providence Police, arrived at 9:24 p.m. and issued citation notices, but the vehicle remained. At 9:51 p.m., an ambulance carrying a 78-year-old man named Angelo Moretti, suffering an acute cardiac event, had its entry path narrowed by the illegally parked car. The delay measured in the report was 92 seconds. 92 seconds. Some people hear that and think it is not much. In emergency medicine, 92 seconds can be a lifetime. Then Rita Alvarez was sworn in. She walked to the stand with the careful tiredness of someone who had already given too much to the day. When I asked her to state her name and occupation, her voice was steady. Rita Elena Alvarez, senior EMT, Rhode Island Hospital, 23 years. She did not try to make herself sound important. That is often how truly important people speak. The prosecutor asked her to explain what happened. She looked once toward Marcus, then back at me. Your Honor, I submitted most of it in writing. I don't want to take up the court's time. I said, Ms. Alvarez, your story matters here. Take the time you need. She gave one small nod and began. She said she had started her shift at 6 a.m. that Saturday and picked up extra hours because a co-worker's son was sick. She was also working 2 evenings a week as a babysitter for a pediatric nurse's twins in Cranston because ever since her husband, Daniel Alvarez, died of colon cancer 2 years earlier, the medical bills had not stopped haunting the family. She had 3 children. Sophia was 24 and in community college part-time. Mateo was 17 and working weekends at a grocery store. Lucia was 11 and still slept with one of Daniel's old t-shirts on hard nights. Rita said all of this softly, almost apologetically, as if explaining her life were somehow an inconvenience to others. I felt my throat tighten. I have heard thousands of stories, but there is something about a person who is drowning quietly and still shows up for other people that breaks through every defense a judge builds over time. She told us that around 6:45 p.m. the orange Lamborghini was already sitting in the ambulance bay. At first I thought maybe it belonged to a surgeon running in for a trauma, she said, but nobody claimed it. She said security called overhead several times. She said patients kept arriving. She said the lane was not fully blocked but badly narrowed. Then came the ambulance carrying Mr. Moretti, the heart patient, rain on the stretcher wheels, family shouting behind them, nurses waving them in, and there, shining like a toy dropped by a careless child, sat that Lamborghini. Rita said she finally saw Marcus at around 10:34 p.m., walking out under the emergency awning with 2 friends laughing. She approached him because security was tied up with incoming patients. I asked if the orange Lamborghini was his. He said, "Depends who's asking." I told him he needed to move it right away because it was in an ambulance bay. He looked at me and smiled like I had said something funny. She paused then. Just 1 second, not for effect, to steady herself. He said, "Send me the ticket and move on with your life." The room got very still. She went on. I told him a patient had been delayed. He said, "Everyone makes mistakes. I didn't hurt anyone." I said that was not his call to make. Then he leaned in a little and looked at my uniform and said, "Do you know who my uncle is?" I said no, and I didn't care. Then he said, "You should. It would save you some embarrassment." I sat back and thought about how often small words reveal whole moral failures, not the parking alone, not even the lie, the contempt, the assumption that somebody else's service made them smaller. Rita continued. She said Marcus moved the car at 10:58 p.m., peeling out so fast the rear tires squealed. She thought that was the end of it. She finished her shift after midnight and went home. At 7:13 a.m. the next morning, she got a call from Providence Police saying a complaint had been filed, accusing her of keying the Lamborghini's driver's side door and stealing a designer sunglasses case from inside the vehicle. "I hadn't even touched the car," she said. "I was in gloves all night. There were cameras everywhere." "Did you know why he filed that complaint?" I asked. She looked down at her folded hands. "Because I wrote him up in the hospital incident report, and because people like him expect people like me to get scared." That sentence stayed with me. Charles Pembroke rose for cross-examination, and to his credit he tried to keep things professional. He asked whether Rita was certain about the times. She answered yes, and referred to her incident notes logged at 10:42 p.m. and 11:06 p.m. He asked if she might have sounded angry when she addressed Marcus. She said, "I was urgent. There is a difference." He asked if the damage to the vehicle could have happened later. She said, "I never damaged his vehicle." He asked if she had ever worked as a babysitter. She looked confused and said yes, 2 nights a week. He seemed almost relieved, as if he had found some point. I understood immediately what they were preparing to do: diminish her, reduce her, make the courtroom hear that word and think less of her. Marcus leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. Pembroke closed his eyes for half a second like a man begging heaven for patience. When I addressed Marcus directly, I kept my voice even. "Mr. Whitmore, do you contest that the Lamborghini was yours?" "No." "Do you contest that it was parked in the ambulance receiving lane?" "It was for a little while." "A little while meaning 4 hours and 17 minutes? He shifted. I wasn't staring at a clock. "Apparently nobody in your party heard the overhead pages either." He gave a shrug. "We were dealing with a family issue inside." I asked, "What family issue?" His lawyer stepped in. "Your Honor, there was a relative being treated for a non-critical matter. Non-critical, I said. And that required parking in an ambulance bay? Marcus spoke before his lawyer could stop him. There wasn't anywhere else close. I stared at him for a moment. Close to what convenience? He let out a breath through his nose, amused. This whole thing is ridiculous. I really do not think this requires a court appearance. I remember feeling something hot move through my chest then. Not loss of control, not rage, something cleaner, the kind of anger that comes when somebody spits on an idea you have spent your life trying to protect. His lawyer tried a new tactic. Your Honor, my client comes from a family that gives generously to Rhode Island institutions. He is willing to donate $25,000 to Rhode Island Hospital as a gesture of good faith so we can resolve this matter constructively. I said, let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your client broke the law, filed a false complaint against a first responder, interfered with emergency access, and your defense is that his family wrote a check? Pembroke flushed. That is not exactly our position. It sounded exactly like your position. I have learned over the years that money speaks with two voices in court. One voice says, I can help make this right. The other says, I should not have to face what ordinary people face. Those two voices may use the same words, but they come from very different souls. Let me pause right here and ask you something. Have you ever dealt with someone who thought rules were for other people? Someone who really believed money, status, or the right last name made them untouchable? If you have, leave me a comment because I read those stories and they matter. And if this moment is hitting you the way it hit me that day, go ahead and like this video because I had not even reached the worst part yet. I asked Rita one more question before moving on. Ms. Alvarez, what effect did this false report have on you? That was the first moment her voice trembled, not when describing the insult, not when describing the delay, but there. She said, I could have lost my job, Your Honor. I've worked there 23 years. I have testified in court before as a medical witness. I train younger EMTs. I've never had a disciplinary problem. And all Sunday morning I was scared they would think I was some angry woman who snapped and damaged a car. My youngest daughter heard me crying in the kitchen. I didn't even know what to tell her. We are still paying off my husband's chemo. I cannot afford to lose one paycheck. You know what I have learned? Sometimes the worst violence is not a fist. It is the deliberate use of power to put fear into a decent person's life. As Rita stepped back from the stand, Christina approached me from the side with a supplemental document that had just come in from court records and hospital administration. Her face told me it mattered. I read quickly. There were 6 unpaid parking citations tied to Marcus Whitmore III in the previous 4 months. 3 had been in restricted emergency or fire zones. 1 outside a dialysis center on Plain Street. 1 outside Hasbro Children's entrance. 1 in a fire lane at an apartment complex on Benefit Street. Pattern, not accident. Pattern. I looked up at Marcus. The smugness had not vanished, but it had shifted. He was no longer performing ease. He was calculating. Mr. Whitmore, I said, why does your vehicle appear in 6 unpaid parking matters in 4 months? His lawyer answered, administrative oversight, Your Honor. I said, did the car park itself? No answer. 3 emergency zones, I continued. 3. You want me to believe this is carelessness? Marcus finally spoke. People exaggerate these things. I held up the file. Paper does not exaggerate. Records do not exaggerate. Dates do not exaggerate. The gallery murmured again. One of his friends sank lower in the bench. Rita sat still, but I noticed her shoulders change. Not relax exactly, more like someone realizing she might not be crazy after all. That matters in a courtroom. Truth does not only punish liars, it steadies the people they tried to shake. Then another layer came in. The court officer brought forward a statement from Hospital Security Supervisor Lorna Peck. She wrote that between 7 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. on the night of September 27th, staff had tried repeatedly to locate the owner of the Lamborghini. At 8:12 p.m., one valet offered to move the vehicle if keys were provided. A man later identified as Marcus had refused, saying, "Nobody touches my car." At 9:37 p.m., a charge nurse requested towing, but administration hesitated because, according to the note, a call had come in from the office of State Senator Richard Whitmore asking that the matter be handled discreetly because the family had ongoing philanthropic ties with the hospital. That was the first time political interference appeared in black and white. I looked over the rim of my glasses at Marcus's lawyer. He shifted his stance. Was Senator Whitmore's office involved in trying to suppress the consequences of this conduct? I asked. Pembroke said, Your Honor, I cannot speak to any third-party communications. No, I said, but your client can. Marcus gave a dry laugh that instantly made the room colder. I didn't tell anyone to do anything. People help my family. That's just reality. I remember thinking then that there are moments when a person confesses without realizing it. He had said more than he meant to, much more. Rita was asked to return briefly, and the prosecutor laid out the next fact. After the false police complaint was filed, hospital administration contacted her direct supervisor on Monday morning. There had been concern about maintaining donor relationships. Donor relationships, think about that. A woman who spent 23 years pulling strangers through the hardest minutes of their lives had her integrity weighed against donor relationships because a rich young man was embarrassed. I had to take a moment. Judges are human beings wearing restraint. Sometimes that restraint feels heavy. I said quietly, "Who pressured the hospital?" The prosecutor replied, "We have not completed that inquiry, Your Honor, but there is an email chain referencing a proposed $50,000 family donation contingent on keeping staff out of the press." Rita closed her eyes then, just for a second. I do not know whether it was relief, anger, or simple exhaustion. Maybe all three. Marcus stopped smiling. His lawyer leaned in and whispered urgently into his ear. Marcus whispered back. Then he sat up straighter and tried a different posture, the posture of the misunderstood rich boy. I have seen that one too. It usually appears right after documents arrive. Then came the piece that changed everything. Christina approached with a printed packet and, in her other hand, a phone inside an evidence sleeve. "Your Honor," she said softly, "hospital security recovered a public Instagram story and post captured before deletion, cross-verified by Providence Police Digital Forensics." Even saying those words changed the air in the room. Marcus's face moved first, not panic yet, but a sharp tightening at the jaw. His lawyer's shoulders dropped a fraction, which told me he had not known. That is never a good sign for the defense. The prosecutor asked permission to publish the images on the courtroom screen. I granted it. There it was, large and bright for everyone to see. A photo posted at 11:47 p.m. on September 27, 2025. The image showed the bright orange Lamborghini Huracan parked directly under the Rhode Island Hospital emergency receiving sign. The red curb lines were clear. The ambulance bay markings were visible. Rain had left a shine on the pavement. In the lower corner of the frame, almost by accident, you could see the edge of a stretcher and the legs of a medic moving past. The caption read, "Park where I want. Whitmore blood means no real tickets. Some babysitter in scrubs tried acting tough tonight. Cute. Hashtag Providence, hashtag family name, hashtag do you know who I am." The room made a sound all at once. Not loud, but the kind of breath people take when disgust outruns surprise. I still get angry thinking about that post, not only because it proved the violation, not only because it mocked a working woman, but because it turned a place of suffering into a stage for vanity, a hospital, an emergency bay, a place where people run toward pain because somebody needs help, and he turned it into background scenery for a joke. I looked at Rita. Her face had changed. Pain, yes, but also vindication. The look of someone seeing the lie exposed in front of witnesses. Tears stood in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She simply stared at the screen like she was watching something ugly finally show its own face in daylight. I asked Marcus, "Is that your post?" His lawyer immediately said, "Your Honor, we need to address context." I said, "I did not ask you, I asked him." Marcus looked at the screen, then at his lawyer, then at me. "It was a joke." "A joke," I repeated. "Yes. A joke about blocking an ambulance bay and mocking an EMT as some babysitter in scrubs." He shifted again. "I didn't mean it literally." My father's voice was in my head then. Character is what comes out of a person when they think nobody can stop them. I asked, "Why did you call her a babysitter?" He shrugged. "Because that's what she is too, apparently." "No," I said. "That is one of two jobs she works while serving this city. There is a difference." The prosecutor then read the metadata, publicly visible at 11:47 p.m., deleted at 8:06 a.m. the next morning. A matching Snapchat upload at 11:52 p.m. had similar text. They can yell all they want. "Whitmore's don't wait for valet peasants." That one had been captured by one of Marcus's own followers, who later sent it to hospital security anonymously after seeing news of the false complaint. That kind of evidence has a force to it because it shows a person unguarded. Courtroom lies are one thing. Bragging to your own audience is another. The mask slips. Marcus's lawyer tried hard. I will give him that. Your Honor, young people use exaggerated language online. It is poor judgment, certainly, but not a reliable statement of intent. I said a poor judgment is forgetting an umbrella. This is contempt, dishonesty, and retaliation in high definition. Then I asked Marcus a simple question. Did you file a police complaint against Ms. Alvarez after she confronted you? He looked at the table and said, on advice of counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights with respect to that question. Now, in a narrow legal sense, that was his right. But in a human sense, in that room, it told its own story. People do not invoke the Fifth over innocent misunderstandings about car scratches unless something much larger is moving beneath the surface. And that was exactly when I learned something larger was moving beneath the surface. The court officer handed me another note, this one from Providence Police Liaison, relaying information from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. Special Agent Elena Ramirez requested presence at the courthouse due to an active investigation involving Marcus Whitmore III and two related shell entities tied to staged luxury vehicle damage claims, staged accidents, inflated repair bills, insurance fraud, pending federal action. Suddenly, the false report against Rita was not a separate act of bad behavior. It was part of a pattern. Use damage claims, use false narratives, use pressure, use status, use the system itself like a tool. I looked back at Marcus. The confidence was cracking now. You could see it around the eyes first. Do you work, Mr. Whitmore? I asked. He blinked. Excuse me? Do you work? I'm between opportunities. That phrase, I have heard it before. Sometimes it means someone has had bad luck. Sometimes it means somebody has never had to earn their own breakfast. How do you support yourself? I asked. My family assists me. With rent? Yes. With the Lamborghini? Silence. With the Brioni suit? His lawyer objected. Your Honor, overruled. I want the answer. Marcus muttered, yes. With the Patek Philippe watch on your wrist? He looked embarrassed for the first time. It was a gift. From whom? My mother. I leaned back. So the answer is no. You do not support yourself. Other people support you. Now here's the part that went viral, and I mean the exact part people were sending each other all over the country. But before I tell you what I said, I want to ask you this. If you were sitting where I was sitting, looking at that woman and then looking at that young man, what would you have done? Put that in the comments. I really want to know. Because the next exchange changed the whole room. The prosecutor was not finished. The city introduced records showing 6 unpaid parking tickets in 4 months, yes, but also that Marcus had contested 2 of them by claiming he was not the driver while posting the same car on his social accounts that same day. There were tow warnings from Benefit Street, a handwritten note from a condominium concierge about verbal abuse, and a prior complaint from a rehabilitation hospital about blocked transport access. Every new page seemed worse than the last. Not because any one parking offense is the end of civilization, it isn't, but because patterns reveal beliefs. His belief was simple. My convenience outweighs your safety. My name outweighs your rules. Then the hospital email chain came in full. That one made even me sit forward. On September 29th at 8:14 a.m., an administrator had written, Senator Whitmore's office has inquired whether Ms. Alvarez can be advised not to escalate. The family remains willing to discuss a meaningful donation package. Another reply at 8:23 a.m. said, Staff discipline is not appropriate absent evidence. Ms. Alvarez is highly respected. Another at 8:31 a.m. said, Please keep this off any formal media line. There it was. The machinery of soft corruption. Not a gun, not a threat shouted in an alley. Just influence dressed as concern. I asked Marcus, Did your family offer money to make this go away? He said, Families protect their own. Rita finally looked at him directly, and there was something in that look that cut more than any argument. Not hatred, disappointment, the kind adults feel when a person had every advantage and chose ugliness anyway. Then came the question that should have been easy. Do you believe you did anything wrong? I asked. He hesitated. His lawyer whispered, Answer carefully. Marcus lifted his chin, the way people do when they mistake pride for strength. I think this has been blown out of proportion by emotional people. We come from different backgrounds, different expectations. With respect, Your Honor, she and I are not equal in any meaningful way." The courtroom erupted. A gasp, then another. Someone in the back actually said, "Oh my God." Charles Pembroke lowered his head into his hands. Rita did not move. Christina looked down, maybe to give the woman privacy in that terrible moment. Even the court officer's jaw tightened. I had to take a moment. "I am telling you the truth." I actually paused and looked away, because I felt my blood pressure tick up and I wanted every word I spoke next to come from judgment, not temper. That matters. A judge cannot become the chaos in the room. A judge has to become the wall the chaos breaks against. I turned back to Marcus. "Not equal, in what way?" He knew he had gone too far. You could see it. But some people, when caught, double down because humility feels more terrifying than consequence. He said, "I mean socially, economically. She's some EMT, some babysitter. I'm not trying to be rude. It's just the truth." There are sentences that reveal a whole bankrupt soul. That was one of them. I felt something old and steady rise inside me then. Not rage, conviction. I thought about Rita lifting stretchers in the rain. I thought about Angelo Moretti losing 92 seconds his heart may not have had. I thought about her dead husband and her 3 children, and the way she had said she cried in her kitchen before sunrise because a rich young man decided her dignity was disposable. I thought about my father, hands cracked from labor, telling me that the only people who truly look down on honest work are people who have never learned the value of their own humanity. So I said very slowly, "You are right about one thing, Mr. Whitmore. You are not equal." The room went silent. "You are not equal," I continued, "because Ms. Alvarez has spent 23 years serving people in pain. She worked a double shift while you parked a bright orange toy in an ambulance bay for 4 hours and 17 minutes. She buried a husband after cancer and kept going. She is raising 3 children. She works a second job babysitting because life has asked more of her than it has ever asked of you. She showed up here without a lawyer, without handlers, without a family name to hide behind, and she told the truth. So no, you are not equal. She is worth 10 of you." People remember that line. I know they do. But what they may not know is that I did not say it to sound tough. I said it because in that moment it was simply true. When you have power over people, that is when your character is tested. Not when things are fair. Not when people applaud you, when you can crush someone smaller and choose not to, or when you can lie and get away with it and choose not to. That is the real test. And Marcus Whitmore III had failed it at every turn. I went on. "You sit there wearing $15,000 of tailoring, $60,000 of watch, designer shoes, a Louis Vuitton case, and a last name you clearly believe is its own legal defense. But all of that has only done one thing this morning. It has made your emptiness more expensive to look at." His face drained, not all at once, like someone turning down a light. I listed the facts one by one. 6 unpaid tickets in 4 months, 3 in emergency zones, a false complaint filed at 12:18 a.m., a public post mocking a first responder at 11:47 p.m., political calls, donation pressure, possible insurance fraud now under federal review. "And still," I said, "you came in here today acting inconvenienced." Then I turned toward Rita. "Ms. Alvarez, the court sees you. The court sees your service. The court sees your courage." She swallowed hard and looked down. "Sometimes kindness is hardest to receive when you have gone too long without it. If you believe accountability still matters, if you believe money should not place anybody above the law, and if you believe ordinary working people deserve to be defended when power tries to bury them, then stay with me and subscribe. Like this video and share it with somebody who needs a reminder that justice still has a pulse. Because what came next was not just a sentence, it was a reckoning. I announced the court's findings clearly. Guilty on the obstruction of emergency access violation. Guilty on the municipal emergency lane offense. Guilty, based on overwhelming evidence and his own shifting statements, on the false reporting related finding before this court's jurisdiction and referral for criminal review where appropriate. I then explained that sentencing would consider not only the act but the pattern, the retaliation, and the contempt shown toward public safety. First, I imposed the standard $500 fine for the parking violation itself. That was the smallest piece, and everybody in the room knew it. Second, I ordered 200 hours of supervised community service at Rhode Island Hospital Emergency Department support operations, subject to hospital approval and legal compliance. Not medical care, of course. He was not qualified for that. But floor work, cleaning, supply runs, sanitation support, mopping floors, emptying bedpans where permitted through non-clinical supervision, wheelchair transport assistance if assigned. The kind of work he had spent his life training himself not to see. It would be performed under the scheduling oversight of the same department Ms. Alvarez served in, though not at her personal direction. I wanted him near the reality he had mocked. Third, I suspended his license for 6 months. You will use public transportation, I said. You will stand in weather with regular people. You will wait. You will learn that your time is not more valuable than everybody else's. Fourth, I ordered a handwritten apology letter of no fewer than 1 full page addressed to Ms. Rita Alvarez. Not typed, handwritten, no lawyer language, no excuses, no family talking points. Fifth, he would read that apology aloud in a controlled hospital staff setting approved by administration to Ms. Alvarez and relevant emergency department personnel, because public humiliation had been his weapon and public accountability would be part of his lesson. Sixth, I ordered a public Instagram post from his verified account explaining exactly what he had done, apologizing to Ms. Alvarez by name with her consent, and acknowledging that blocking an emergency zone and filing false accusations carries consequences. That post was to remain visible for 1 full year. If he deleted it early, it would constitute contempt and trigger review of compliance. Seventh, I ordered a no-strings $50,000 donation to Rhode Island Hospital's Emergency Hardship Fund for staff and patient support, and an additional personal $50,000 match paid in monthly installments over 12 months, not the family. Him. If family gave him the money, that was between him and them, but the legal obligation was personal. Miss one payment, and the community service doubled from 200 to 400 hours. When I brought the gavel down, it cracked through the room like dry wood splitting in winter. But the day was still not done with him. Almost as if timed by a novelist, though life sometimes does that on its own, the courtroom doors opened from the back. A woman stepped in first, early 60s, expensive charcoal pantsuit, sharp posture, face pale with contained anger. Catherine Whitmore, Marcus's mother. Behind her came Special Agent Elena Ramirez from the FBI Financial Crimes Division, dark suit, government folder, expression that said she had no interest in theater, and even less in excuses. Every head in the room turned. Agent Ramirez approached with formal calm and said, "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I need to serve notice related to an active federal matter and request immediate surrender of passport documents through counsel." Charles Pembroke stood so fast his chair scraped. Marcus looked stunned. Real stunned. Not annoyed, not insulted, afraid. I allowed the approach. Ramirez handed the paperwork to counsel and stated for the record that Marcus Whitmore III was a subject in an ongoing investigation involving staged vehicle loss claims, fraudulent repair invoices, and possible conspiracy across multiple insurance filings dating back 11 months. Not accused in vague whispers anymore. Named, documented, moving. And then Catherine Whitmore did something I think shocked him more than the FBI. She looked right at her son and said in a voice every person in that courtroom heard, "You parked in an ambulance bay and posted about it on Instagram? Are you actually stupid?" No one breathed. She did not sit. She did not fuss over him. She did not perform maternal protection. She stood there furious, ashamed, and very aware of the family reputation collapsing in public. Marcus whispered, "Mom," she cut him off. "Do not mom me in this room, not today." Sometimes consequences become real only when the people who always cushioned you stop reaching out. His face lost all color then. The swagger was gone, gone. The shoulders dropped. The mouth opened once, then closed. He looked young suddenly, not innocent, just stripped of costume. It is amazing how fast arrogance can leave a body when reality finally gets a firm grip on it. I watched his lawyer place a hand on the table and steady himself. This was no longer about parking. It was not even only about Rita. It was about a way of living that had mistaken insulation for invincibility. Before we closed, I asked Marcus to stand and turn toward Rita. He did so slowly. I said, "Ms. Alvarez did not have to come here today. She came after a double shift. She came while raising 3 children. She came while carrying grief most people in this room know nothing about. And she came because truth mattered more to her than comfort." Rita looked exhausted and dignified and, in that moment, stronger than anybody in a suit. I said to Marcus, "I want you to look carefully at what real courage looks like. It looks like her, not you. It looks like the people who show up and do the work while people like you complain that rules are beneath them. Rita did not gloat. That is part of why she stays in my mind. She simply met his eyes and gave the smallest, saddest smile. Not victory, not pleasure, just the quiet recognition that she had survived him. As the room began to shift and papers moved and officers stepped forward, I leaned slightly toward Rita and said, low enough for only her to hear, "You didn't need me to prove your worth. You had already won before you walked in." Her eyes filled then. She nodded once. No speech, no grand scene, just truth landing where it needed to land. That evening when I went home, the rain had stopped, but the road still shined under the street lights. I drove more slowly than usual. Cases stay with me sometimes, but some stay differently. This one had a sharp edge. I kept replaying that line in my head. Not equal in any meaningful way. I thought about how many people hear versions of that sentence every day without the words ever being spoken. In offices, in schools, in hospitals, in families. Power has many dialects. Joyce was in the kitchen when I got home setting out soup and bread. She looked at my face and knew right away the day had been heavy. "Bad one?" she asked. I sat down and loosened my tie. "Important one," I said. That is how I told her. Important one. Because some cases are sad, some are frustrating, some are forgettable, but every now and then one becomes a test of the room itself, of whether the courtroom will be a place where truth bends or a place where truth stands. I told Joyce what happened. The car, the post, the insult, the FBI, the mother, all of it. She listened the way she always does, without interrupting too much. When I finished, she said, "You did what needed doing." I said, "I hope so." She put a bowl in front of me and sat across from me. "Frank, compassion is not letting people escape consequences. Compassion is making sure consequences still teach something." That sentence went straight into the place where I keep the best wisdom I have borrowed from other people. I have had many cases over the years where mercy changed a life. A young father who needed one more chance. A frightened woman buried in tickets after caring for a sick parent. A teenager who made one stupid choice and needed structure, not destruction. I believe deeply in that kind of mercy. But I also believe there are moments when the kindest thing a court can do for a person and for a community is to draw a hard line and say, enough, this far and no farther. Equal justice does not mean identical outcomes. It means honest ones. 3 weeks later, on Monday, November 3rd, 2025, Christina brought me a letter in a plain white envelope with careful handwriting on the front. Rita Alvarez. Inside was a 2-page note. I still remember parts of it almost word for word. She wrote, "Dear Judge Caprio, thank you for seeing me as a person and not just a case number. That morning I was scared in a way I am ashamed to admit. Not because I doubted the truth, but because I doubted whether truth would matter against money and connections. When you said the court saw me, something in me let go that had been clenched for weeks." I stopped reading there for a moment. I had to. Then I kept going. She wrote that her youngest daughter, Lucia, had watched the clip later online and said, "Mom, he called you small, but the judge said you were big." Children can simplify a whole moral universe in one sentence. Rita also wrote that she had joined a grief support group again for the first time since Daniel died, because the case had reminded her how tired and frightened she really had been. "You gave me back some faith," she wrote, "not just in court but in people." I folded that letter very carefully when I finished. There are some things I keep in my desk because they remind me what the work is for. Notes from veterans, drawings from children, letters from people who felt heard. Rita's letter went into that drawer. 6 months passed. Life moved the way life does. More cases, more faces, more mornings with coffee and rain and courthouse wood and people carrying trouble. Then one Saturday in April, I was at a grocery store in Cranston with Joyce. We were in the produce section of all places, looking at tomatoes, when I heard a voice say, "Your Honor?" I turned, and there was Rita. She looked different, lighter somehow. Not carefree. Life had not suddenly turned easy, but lighter. Her hair was down. She wore jeans, a plain green sweater, and no uniform. There were still tired lines around her eyes, but not the same burdened heaviness. Beside her stood a young girl I recognized from the letter as Lucia. Rita introduced her, and the child smiled shyly. We talked for maybe 7 minutes. She told me she was back to regular hospital shifts and had cut back one babysitting night because Sophia had picked up more hours. Mateo was close to graduation. Lucia was doing better in school, and then Rita told me something that hit me harder than she probably knew. She said she had started volunteering twice a month with a support circle for hospital workers dealing with grief, burnout, and family stress. "I figured if I could help someone else the way you helped me," she said, "then maybe this whole awful thing could turn into something useful." That is what I mean when I talk about ripple effects. You think a ruling ends at the gavel. It doesn't. It goes home with people. It enters kitchens. It changes how children see their parents. It shapes whether the frightened keep speaking up or stop. It teaches somebody somewhere what kind of country this is or is not. I asked her how she was really doing, not politely, really. She smiled that same dignified smile I remembered from court and said, "Some days are still very hard, but I'm finding my way." There is wisdom in that sentence. No fake triumph, no dramatic miracle, just the honest work of healing. Later that year, with her permission, I spoke about the case at a judicial conference. I often speak to younger judges and to legal groups about discretion, humanity, and the danger of becoming numb. The room that day included judges, clerks, public defenders, municipal lawyers, and a few law students. I did not share it as gossip. I shared it as a lesson. I told them the facts, the pressure, the political phone calls, the temptation some systems feel to soften around money, and the greater temptation judges feel to protect themselves with emotional distance. Then we opened the floor. One judge from Massachusetts said she had faced a similar issue where a wealthy donor's son thought a reckless driving charge should disappear. Another from Connecticut spoke about a home health aide almost destroyed by a false theft accusation. A magistrate from New York said the hardest cases were not the loud ones, but the ones where power operated through suggestion, favors, and helpful calls. We ended up having one of the most honest conversations I've seen in years about what judicial discretion is really for. Rules matter, of course they do, but discretion is not a loophole. It is a moral instrument. It is what allows a judge to see the whole person and the whole harm. Without discretion, the law becomes lazy. Without principle, discretion becomes corruption. You need both truth and heart. As for Marcus Whitmore III, yes, I followed the outcome. Not obsessively, just enough to know what happened. He completed the hospital service, though I am told the first weeks were rough. There is something humbling about a man who once mocked staff being handed a mop bucket at 6:30 in the morning. He lost driving privileges for the 6 months. His public apology post stayed up the full year because, according to counsel, he had no desire to test contempt. His family did not rescue him the way they once might have. The Lamborghini was sold. The watch disappeared from his wrist long before the year ended. The federal case concluded with a guilty plea to insurance fraud conspiracy. He served time. Brief compared to what some crimes receive, but real time. Legal fees, penalties, asset losses, family trust restrictions, public shame, and the court-ordered payments hollowed out the easy life he had mistaken for permanent. By the following year, I was told he had filed personal bankruptcy protection. In that sense, yes, the order and what followed bankrupted him. But if I'm honest, the real bankruptcy had been there long before. It was moral. Rita did something beautiful with her own aftermath. She helped start a small emergency worker support fund with hospital staff and local donors, named in memory of her husband Daniel Alvarez. It gave grocery cards, transit help, and emergency childcare aid to first responders and hospital workers going through loss or financial strain. Later, they talked about turning part of it into a scholarship for children of EMTs. Imagine that. A story that began with cruelty became a shelter for other people. That is grace, not soft grace, hard-earned grace. Now, after all these years, people sometimes ask me what cases I am most proud of. They expect me to name the famous ones, the unusual ones, the ones that made headlines. But that is not the truth. The cases I carry closest are the ones where a human being walked in feeling invisible and walked out feeling seen, the ones where mercy was used well, the ones where firmness protected dignity instead of ego, the ones that reminded everyone in the room that law without humanity is just force wearing a tie. Check out the next video on your screen too, because I have another story that will stay with you the same way this one stayed with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to stay until the end. I'm Frank Caprio. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We're all equal before the law, or the law means very little. Justice without mercy is not really justice at all. God bless you. Take care of each other. Show kindness whenever you can. And remember this, because I mean it with all my heart. Respect costs nothing, but it's worth everything.